Hey there, tonight we're exploring the celestial dance of ancient Egypt's skies, where the stars guided both the pharaohs and farmers. And surprisingly, the truth is their astrology was as much a science as it was mysticism. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. Somewhere around 5,000 years ago, while the rest of the world was busy inventing the wheel or discovering fire, the ancient Egyptians were gazing up at the heavens, trying to figure out what in Ra's name was going on up there. It's a tale as old as time. Well, older than the pyramids at least. Picture a civilization so obsessed with the cosmos, they basically made it their full-time job to track stars, chart planets, and occasionally get a little carried away with astrology. Now, the Egyptians weren't just stargazers for fun. Their lives depended on it. The Nile was their lifeline, and the river had a mind of its own, flooding when it pleased, which was generally inconvenient unless you knew how to predict it. Enter the star Sirius, known to the Egyptians as Sarpdid. When Sirius made its annual debut in the pre-dawn sky, it was like the Nile's personal alarm clock, signaling that the floods were coming. This wasn't just a cosmic coincidence, it was practical, life-saving intel. And while we're on the topic of practical, let's talk about the Egyptian calendar. You might have heard that it was the epitome of precision, a marvel of ancient science. Well, hold your horses, or your chariots, as it were. The truth is, while it was a solid effort, calling it precise might be a bit generous. Their calendar was 365 days long, which sounds spot on, until you realize they didn't account for that sneaky little quarter day that makes our modern leap years necessary. So, every year, they drifted a little further from the actual solar year. Imagine a calendar that's like a clock that loses a few minutes every day. Not catastrophic, but eventually, you're going to be late to everything. But to give credit where it's due, the Egyptians were doing all this starry-eyed math without the benefit of telescopes, computers, or even a decent cup of coffee. Their astronomers, or priests of time, as they fancily called themselves, used simple tools like the Merkit, kind of ancient Egyptian timepiece, and the Bay, a forerunner of the sundial. They would stand on strategically placed observatories, likely on temple roofs, to make their celestial observations. This wasn't just about knowing when to plant crops. It was about aligning the very soul of their culture with the universe. Of course, the sky wasn't just a celestial calendar. It was also a cosmic soap opera full of gods, myths, and enough drama to make a modern telenovela blush. The night sky was a canvas where Horus battled Set, and Nut swallowed the sun each evening only to give birth to it the next morning. These stories weren't just bedtime tales. They were woven into the fabric of society, influencing everything from architecture to politics. But let's not kid ourselves. These astronomers weren't just noble scholars in linen kilts. There was a fair bit of astrology mixed into their astronomy, and who could blame them? Predicting the future based on the whims of the cosmos is a pastime as ancient as civilization itself. The Egyptians believed that the movements of the stars and planets had a direct impact on human fate. It's astrology, but with the kind of gravitas that comes with being chiseled into a temple wall. One of the more curious artifacts of Egyptian celestial navigation is the Dendera zodiac. It's like a cosmic map that makes horoscopes look like child's play. This relic, found in the Hathor temple, shows the Egyptians' attempt to chart the sky with an eye on the divine. It features constellations and planetary positions, all wrapped up in a circular zodiac that would make any New Age enthusiast's heart skip a beat. But before you get too swept away by the romance of ancient stargazing, let's remember the practical side. The Egyptians didn't have the luxury of being purely academic about their celestial interests. Their society was a complex machine that needed the steady rhythm of the cosmos to keep ticking. The stars weren't just pretty, they were essential to the very survival of the civilization. In the end, the ancient Egyptians' relationship with the sky was a heady mix of science, mythology, and necessity. They were part astronomer, part astrologer, with a healthy dose of pragmatism. It's a reminder that sometimes reaching for the stars is as much about survival as it is about wonder. Stay tuned for the next part of our journey through the Egyptian cosmos, where we'll dive deeper into how these celestial observations shaped not just calendars, but entire dynasties. Who knew the stars could be such powerful players in the Game of Thrones, ancient Egyptian style? As we journey deeper into the starry annals of ancient Egypt, let's untangle the celestial web woven between their astronomy and astrology. It's not just about star charts and horoscopes, folks. We're talking a blend of science and mysticism that would make any 21st century skeptic raise an eyebrow. While the priests of time were busy tracking the cosmos with their Merkhits, another cadre of priests, let's call them the PR department of the divine, were busy interpreting these celestial signals as messages from the gods. And you better believe the pharaohs were all ears. So, what was the deal with Egyptian astrology? Well, it wasn't exactly the kind of astrology that tells you to avoid making big decisions because Mercury's in retrograde. No, the Egyptians had a far grander scheme, tying the very fate of their leaders and their nation to the movements of the stars. They believed that the divine order of the cosmos mirrored the earthly realm, and any celestial event had its counterpart down here. Talk about pressure on your local astronomer-astrologer. Now, let's put ourselves in the sandals of a pharaoh for a moment. Imagine sitting on your limestone throne, pondering your next big move. Maybe you're Ramses Roman II, and you're contemplating yet another temple to add to your collection. Or perhaps you're Cleopatra, and you're plotting a political alliance with Rome. Either way, you're not just looking at your general's battle plans or your advisor's fiscal reports. You're also consulting the stars. They were the ancient world's version of a strategic consultant, and their advice came with divine endorsement, or so it seemed. Here's where it gets juicy. Did these pharaohs genuinely buy into the cosmic fortune-telling, or was it all a clever ruse? It's tempting to think they might have used astrology as a kind of divine validation for their decisions. I mean, if a star said it was a good day to conquer Nubia or build another obelisk, who were the people to argue? This celestial endorsement was like having a direct line to the gods, and who could resist such convenient divine PR? But let's not paint every pharaoh with the same brush of cosmic cynicism. Some rulers likely believed in the stars' influence with the fervor of a true believer. After all, when your entire culture is built around the divine cosmic order, even the most pragmatic ruler might find themselves swayed by a particularly auspicious alignment. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian astrology was the decans. These were 36 star groups that rose consecutively on the horizon every 10 days, dividing the year into what we might think of as hyper-accurate astrological weeks. Each decan was associated with specific deities and had its own set of influences, which meant that pharaohs and their advisors could tailor their decisions to the divine will down to the weak. Who needs a Monday morning horoscope when you've got decans, right? But here's the kicker. Decans weren't just about telling the future. They were also a handy way to keep track of time at night, essentially acting as a stellar clock. This dual purpose is a prime example of the Egyptians' knack for blending the practical with the mystical. It's like having a GPS that also reads your fortune, both useful and mysterious. Now, before you start thinking that Egyptian astrology was all about bolstering pharaonic egos, let's zoom out to the wider societal impact. Astrology wasn't just for the elite. It trickled down to the masses, who looked to the heavens for guidance in their everyday lives. Farmers consulted the stars for the best times to sow and harvest, while merchants might have checked the celestial scorecard before embarking on a trade expedition. In a land where the whims of the Nile could make or break your livelihood, any edge was worth pursuing, even if it came from a constellation. Of course, with all this star-driven decision-making, mistakes were bound to happen. And when things went south, it was easy to blame a misread omen or a star that wasn't quite where it should have been. It's a tough gig being an astrologer when every wrong prediction could mean the difference between a bountiful harvest and a famine. But hey, at least they didn't have Yelp reviews to worry about. Yet, despite the occasional celestial misstep, the Egyptians' cosmic obsession left an indelible mark on their civilization. Their astrology wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about understanding their place in the universe. They saw themselves as part of a grand cosmic tapestry where every star and planet played a role in the divine drama of life. As we continue our journey through the Egyptian cosmos, keep in mind that the line between astrology and astronomy was as fluid as the Nile itself. Both were tools to navigate the uncertainties of life, providing comfort and guidance in a world that could be as harsh as the desert sun. So, next time you gaze up at the night sky, remember the Egyptians, who saw not just stars, but the very fingerprints of the gods. Stay tuned as we delve further into how these celestial beliefs shaped not just the heavens, but the earthbound destinies of the pharaohs and their people. Who knew a bunch of twinkling lights could wield such power? So, as we embark on this leg of our Egyptian journey, let's trade our stargazing for some good old-fashioned stone stacking. Yes, it's time to tackle those architectural wonders that have baffled and bedazzled us for millennia. I'm talking about the pyramids and temples, those towering testaments to the Egyptians' knack for turning mountains of limestone into cosmic lighthouses. First off, let's address the elephant, or rather the stone block, in the room. Were these astronomical edifices built purely for science, steeped in superstition, or just one-upping the neighbors with the world's most elaborate, mine's bigger contest? Spoiler alert, it's a little bit of everything. The Great Pyramid of Giza, the largest and perhaps the most famous of these marvels, was originally covered in gleaming white Tura limestone, reflecting the sun like a beacon of divine grandeur. But here's the kicker. This wasn't just a vanity project for Pharaoh Khufu, or Cheops, if you prefer the Greek version. The pyramid's precise alignment with the cardinal points and its astronomical connections suggest a deeper cosmic purpose, perhaps a celestial launchpad for the king's soul to ascend to the heavens. Now, about those astronomical alignments. The Great Pyramid is aligned within a fraction of a degree to true north. That's not the kind of precision you'd expect from folks who didn't have GPS or laser levels. How did they do it? Some suggest they used the circumpolar stars, the ones that circle around the North Star without setting, as their guide. Others propose that the Egyptians might have used a shadow-casting stick during the equinoxes to nail down the cardinal directions. Either way, it's clear they weren't just eyeballing it. And while we're on the subject of celestial alignments, let's not forget that the Egyptians treated their temples like cosmic calculators, too. The Temple of Karnak, for instance, was aligned with the solstices. During the winter solstice, the sun would rise directly between the massive pylons, bathing the inner sanctuary in a golden glow. Talk about a divine light show. But before you start thinking these structures were just glorified observatories, let's dig into the economic and labor realities. Constructing these limestone leviathans wasn't exactly a weekend DIY project. It took a massive workforce, often touted as slaves, but more likely conscripted farmers and artisans during the Nile's inundation period when agricultural work was on pause. These laborers were organized into crews of around 2,000 men, divided further into smaller groups, each with their own foremen. Think of it as a well-oiled pyramid building machine. And here's a fun fact. These workers weren't exactly living in squalor. Archaeological evidence suggests they were well fed, with a diet that included beef, bread, and beer, a kind of ancient workers' camp that kept them fueled for the back-breaking work of hauling and heaving stones. It's estimated that around 3 million blocks were used for the Great Pyramid alone, each weighing an average of 5 tons. So, next time you complain about heavy lifting at the gym, spare a thought for these guys. Speaking of logistics, how did they manage to hoist those enormous stones to the top of the pyramid? Theories abound, from straight ramps to zigzagging switchbacks, and even the possibility of a spiral ramp built into the pyramid itself. But let's face it, regardless of the method, it was a monumental feat of engineering and manpower, literally. Now, it's easy to romanticize these projects as purely spiritual endeavors, but let's call a spade a spade. There was a hefty dose of politics and power play involved. The pyramids and temples weren't just for the gods. They were symbols of the pharaoh's divine right to rule. Each monument was a statement of their might and a bid for immortality, ensuring that their legacy would be etched into the sands of time. But what about the folks who actually did the heavy lifting? Well, they weren't just nameless faces in the stone quarry. Recent discoveries of workers' tombs suggest they were respected members of society, a far cry from the downtrodden slaves often portrayed in Hollywood epics. In fact, inscriptions found in these tombs reveal that some workers even earned titles like overseer of the side of the pyramid. highlighting their status and contribution to these colossal projects. So, were these grand constructions a blend of science, superstition, or sheer egotism? In true Egyptian fashion, it was a heady cocktail of all three. The pyramids and temples were more than just architectural feats. They were celestial crossroads, political power plays, and social equalizers rolled into one. And let's not forget the economic ramifications. Building such monumental structures wasn't cheap. It required a well-oiled economy, capable of sustaining not just the labor force, but the entire supply chain, from quarry to construction site. The sheer scale of these projects speaks volumes about the administrative prowess of the ancient Egyptian state, which could marshal resources across vast distances with remarkable efficiency. So, as we marvel at these ancient wonders, let's remember that they weren't just built to dazzle or to serve as eternal homes for the pharaohs. They were also deeply entwined with the earthly realities of economics, politics, and society. But don't put away your stargazing gear just yet. In the next leg of our journey through the Egyptian cosmos, we'll delve into how these monumental feats of engineering and celestial alignment influenced not just the spiritual, but also the temporal ambitions of those who ruled the Nile. Stay tuned as we navigate the complex interplay between the heavens and the earth, where the stars and stones conspired to shape the destiny of a civilization. In the grand tapestry of ancient Egypt, the stars weren't just guiding the hands that built the pyramids. They were shaping the destinies of everyone from the pharaohs down to the humblest farmer. Let's zoom out and see how the heavens played a role in the daily grind of Egyptian life, where a horoscope held as much weight as your annual grain yield, and celestial phenomena could send ripples through the kingdom faster than you could say, solar eclipse. First things first. Why in Ra's name were the Egyptians so obsessed with these cosmic patterns? Well, when your entire agriculture system is tied to the whims of the Nile, having a reliable forecast wasn't just handy, it was vital. Picture this. In a land where rain was rarer than a snowstorm in the desert, the Nile's annual inundation was both a blessing and a curse. Too much water, your crops drown. Too little, famine knocks at your door. This is where the star Sirius, or Sarpted, was the ancient equivalent of the evening news weather report, heralding the coming floods and turning astrology into agronomy. Now, let's not sugarcoat things. The stakes were high because agriculture wasn't just about feeding the family. It was the backbone of the economy, the thing that kept the wheels of the state turning. Taxes, you see, were calculated based on the anticipated yield, the ancient version of appraising your assets. If the stars misled and the crops failed, it wasn't just the farmers who felt the squeeze. The entire economic structure could wobble like a pyramid built on quicksand. But agriculture was only the beginning. The Egyptians had this knack for weaving the cosmic into the mundane, a kind of celestial multitasking. Take, for instance, the aftermath of a solar eclipse. To us modern folks, it's a chance to wear funky glasses and post a few Instagram pics. But to the Egyptians, it was a celestial alarm bell. An eclipse meant the gods were sending a message, usually of the change your ways or else variety. Kingdoms could be thrown into turmoil, policies rewritten, and pharaohs suddenly found themselves needing some serious PR spin. Imagine a royal decree announcing, the gods have spoken, and they kindly request a new tax policy. You might chuckle, but when the divine scoreboard is written in the stars, rulers listened. Speaking of rulers, the pharaohs weren't just figureheads lounging in luxury. They were considered divine intermediaries, the cosmic conductors of the earthly orchestra. Their coronations were tied to celestial events, their reigns punctuated by star-studded ceremonies. This was no coincidence. Aligning one's rule with the cosmos was as much a political maneuver as it was a spiritual one. It gave legitimacy, a celestial seal of approval that no earthly power could contest. But the real magic, or madness, depending on your point of view, lay in how deeply ingrained these beliefs were in the collective consciousness. Everyone from the priesthood to the peasantry had a stake in the cosmic game. The priests, those keepers of celestial knowledge, were akin to the financial analysts of today. Their predictions could make or break a year's prosperity. They held the keys to the cosmic kingdom, and you can bet they wielded that power with a mix of reverence and savvy political acumen. Now, let's tackle one of the more alluring myths, the afterlife. Ah, yes, the Egyptians and their journey to the great beyond. The afterlife wasn't just a footnote in the book of life. It was the whole epilogue. The stars were thought to guide souls through the celestial bureaucracy of the afterlife. The Book of the Dead, that ancient guide to the hereafter, was essentially a cosmic roadmap, ensuring you didn't take a wrong turn at Orion. The journey to the afterlife was as complex as a bureaucratic maze, full of gates, guardians, and trials that would make even the most seasoned traveler break into a celestial sweat. The stars, in this cosmic odyssey, were thought to be the resting places of the blessed dead, and the Pharaoh's journey was a first-class ticket to join the sun god Ra in his daily voyage across the sky. But heaven help you if the star charts were off. You could end up wandering the celestial desert for eternity. Now, before we get too wrapped up in the romance of it all, let's not forget the gritty reality. Preparing for the afterlife was an expensive business. The cost of a proper burial, complete with all the necessary accoutrements for a smooth celestial journey, could bankrupt a family faster than a pyramid scheme gone wrong. Mummification, those elaborate tombs, precious amulets, each was a hefty investment in ensuring your eternal comfort. It's like the ultimate retirement plan, but with a divine twist. But here's the kicker. Despite the meticulous planning and astronomical expenditures, the afterlife was still a roll of the cosmic dice. The weighing of the heart ceremony, where your moral compass was judged against the feather of Mad, was a make-or-break moment. You could have all the star maps in the world, but if your heart was heavier than a feather, well, let's just say your journey would be taking a detour. So, as we gaze back at the ancient Egyptian cosmos, it's clear that the stars were more than mere points of light. They were the strings that pulled the puppet of daily life, the invisible hand that guided the fates of pharaohs and farmers alike. From the moment you were born to the day you embarked on your journey to the afterlife, the cosmos was your constant companion, your divine GPS in a world where the sands shifted as unpredictably as the stars. But don't hang up your star charts just yet. We've still got more cosmic ground to cover. In the final leg of our journey, we'll dive into the dynastic dramas where celestial events didn't just influence policies, but could decide wars and shift the balance of power. Stay tuned, because the stars have more stories to tell, and we're not done unraveling their ancient mysteries just yet. So, when it comes to ancient Egypt, the stars weren't just up there twinkling prettily. They were the cosmic chess pieces in a game where the stakes were as high as a pyramid. But let's fast forward to today and unravel how these celestial obsessions have left their fingerprints all over modern life. From astrology to architectural marvels, the Egyptian starry legacy is like that old mixtape you can't quite throw away, scratched, but still surprisingly relevant. First, let's tackle astrology, that ancient practice of looking to the heavens for guidance. You might think of it as a quaint superstition, but its roots are deeper than the Nile. Modern horoscopes owe a debt to the Egyptians, who, with their decans and star charts, laid the groundwork for the astrological calendars we love to hate read. Sure, today's horoscopes might not determine when to plant your wheat or invade Nubia, but they still hold sway over millions who consult them for everything from romance advice to lottery numbers. It's a testament to human nature. We crave that cosmic connection, a little magic in the mundane. Now, let's swivel our gaze to architecture. Those pyramids have become the poster children for enduring mystery and mathematical precision. The Great Pyramid of Giza, with its alignment to true north, and its mind-boggling scale, too. 3 million blocks, remember, continues to baffle and inspire. You can't swing a cat in the architectural world without hitting a pyramid-inspired design. From the Louvre's glass pyramid to Vegas's Luxor Hotel, the fascination with these ancient structures transcends time and geography. It's as if the Egyptians whispered to us from the sands, "Go ahead, try to top this." But before we get too starry-eyed, let's debunk a few myths. The idea that these massive structures were built by slaves is about as accurate as a tabloid horoscope. Evidence points to a workforce of well-fed laborers, organized with almost military precision and motivated by more than just the whip. And about that precision, while it's true the Egyptians were masters of their craft, the notion that aliens lent a hand is, frankly, an insult to their ingenuity. These were humans, not little green men, who figured out how to haul 80-ton stones using nothing but grit and a lot of beer. Now, considering the economic context, building a pyramid was like constructing a skyscraper today. It required a booming economy and serious state resources. The logistics were staggering. Quarries, transportation, food supply, and a workforce that could rival a small city. It's a reminder that these architectural wonders were as much about showcasing state power as they were about reaching for the stars. The pyramids were the ultimate flex, a stone-cold testament to pharaonic power that still whispers through the ages. And let's not forget the gritty realities often glossed over by romantic narratives. Take the afterlife, for instance. Sure, the Egyptians had elaborate plans, but the cost of ensuring a smooth posthumous journey was prohibitive. The average Joe, or should I say, the average Amos, didn't get a pyramid. Most were lucky to get a decent burial pit. This cosmic inequality was as entrenched as any earthly one, with the grand tombs of the elite standing in stark contrast to the modest graves of the many. But here's the kicker. The Egyptians' cosmic worldview wasn't just a flight of fancy. It was a survival mechanism. In a world where the Nile could make or break your year, understanding the stars was as critical as knowing the seasons. It was their way of imposing order on chaos, a celestial insurance policy in an unpredictable world. And in that sense, their legacy is less about the stars themselves and more about the human desire to find meaning in the universe. So, in wrapping up our cosmic journey, let's reflect on the enduring allure of Egypt's star-crossed saga. The romance is undeniable, but the reality is even more compelling. It's a tale of survival, innovation, and the eternal quest to understand our place in the cosmos. Whether it's the ancient Egyptian priest with his Merkit or the modern stargazer with a smartphone app, we're all part of the same story. The stars may guide us, inspire us, and sometimes mislead us, but they remind us that we're part of something bigger. As we close the chapter on this celestial saga, remember that the Egyptians were doing more than just building monuments and mapping the skies. They were laying the foundations for our own cosmic curiosities. So next time you glance at your horoscope or marvel at a pyramid, think of it as a nod to those ancient stargazers who dared to dream big and left us with a legacy that's as eternal as the stars themselves. In the tangled aftermath of the Roman Empire's dramatic exit from the European stage, it was as if someone had flipped the switch on a medieval version of Survivor, minus the island and with significantly more chainmail. Welcome to post-Roman Europe, a place where the concept of who's the boss was more confusing than a modern tax return. The power vacuum left behind was so vast, it could have hosted its own reality show, complete with squabbling nobles and ambitious peasants trying their luck at the crown. And into this chaotic landscape, the feudal system sauntered in like it owned the place. Because, well, it kind of did. This wasn't just a political and economic structure. It was the medieval equivalent of a cosmic trade show where land was the ultimate currency. If you had it, you ruled the roost. If you didn't, you were probably working for someone who did, all while dreaming of the day you get your own slice of the pie, or at least a slightly bigger crumb. Now, the origins of this feudal arrangement trace back to the 8th and 9th centuries, when Frankish rulers like Charlemagne were busy trying to figure out how to run a kingdom that stretched over a territory roughly the size of modern-day France, Germany, and Italy combined. Just imagine the logistical nightmare of governing an area that large without the help of email or Google Maps. The solution? Delegation, but with a medieval twist. Kings needed lords to manage chunks of land, and those lords needed vassals to actually do the heavy lifting, or ploughing, as the case may be. This wasn't just a chain of command. It was a chain of land grants, promises, and a whole lot of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. Of course, the appeal of the feudal system was as much about security as it was about economics. After all, who wouldn't want a bit of protection against the roving bands of Vikings who saw Europe as their personal playground? If you were a peasant, pledging your loyalty to a local lord in exchange for protection and a plot to farm seemed like a pretty sweet deal, especially when the alternative could involve plundering and pillaging, the romantic notion of noble knights and fair maidens dancing through fields of prosperity. More likely, it was about keeping everyone a few degrees away from total chaos. The social structure of the feudal system was as rigid as the armor worn by its knights. At the top of the hierarchy sat the king, like the ultimate landlord, overseeing a patchwork quilt of territories that he technically owned but rarely visited. Below him were the nobles, the VIPs of the medieval world, who ruled over their own domains with varying degrees of autonomy. Then came the knights, the armored enforcers who were as much about pageantry as they were about protection. And finally, the peasants, the backbone of the entire operation, toiling away in fields and villages, dreaming of a day when they might move up the social ladder, or at least get an extra day off. But let's not get too carried away with the idea that everyone was on board with this system. The truth is, the feudal hierarchy was as much about coercion as it was about consensus. For every noble who swore fealty to a king, there were probably a dozen more who were plotting to overthrow him. And for every peasant who dutifully paid his dues, there were others who resisted, sometimes subtly, sometimes not so much. The medieval landscape was dotted with small rebellions and power struggles, like a chessboard with pieces that kept trying to change sides. So, why did this convoluted system of land and loyalty become the go-to model for medieval Europe? Partly because it was effective in its own, slightly dysfunctional way. It provided a framework for stability in a world that was anything but stable. But it was also a product of its time, a reflection of a society where land was wealth, loyalty was currency, and long-term planning meant thinking about the next harvest, not the next decade. The feudal system might seem archaic and romantic from our modern vantage point, but for those living through it, it was a daily grind of obligations and opportunities, with the occasional chance for advancement or rebellion. In the end, the feudal system didn't just shape medieval Europe, it defined it. It was a world where the lines between power and poverty were as stark as the castles that dotted the landscape. And while the system eventually crumbled under the weight of its own contradictions, replaced by more centralized forms of government, its legacy lingers on. After all, who hasn't felt like a peasant in a world run by kings, waiting for their chance to break free? Knights, the supposed rock stars of the medieval world, were often seen as the epitome of chivalry and courage. But hold your horses, literally, because the life of a knight wasn't just about gallant deeds and noble quests. In reality, it was more about managing land, dealing with the medieval version of office politics, and trying not to get skewered in battle. Let's dive into the less glamorous, yet critically essential, aspects of their role. First off, becoming a knight was no walk in the park. It was more like a marathon over rocky terrain. Training started early, usually around the tender age of 7, when boys from noble families were packed off to live in the household of another lord, a sort of medieval boarding school with a focus on martial arts. Here, they learned the ropes as pages and squires, gradually picking up the skills needed to manage an estate and swing a sword without lopping off their own limbs. By the time they were dubbed knights, often around their early 20s, they were expected to uphold not just their family honor, but also their lord's interests, quite the juggling act. Economically, knights were the middle management of the feudal system. They were granted land in exchange for military service, which sounds like a sweet deal until you realize that the land also came with people, peasants who worked the fields. Knights had to keep these folks productive because, ultimately, they were the ones generating the wealth. So, while we might picture knights charging into battle with banners waving, much of their time was spent overseeing agricultural production and ensuring the local economy didn't nosedive. Military duties weren't just about donning armor and looking dashing. Knights were expected to be battle-ready, a moment's notice, whether it was quelling a local rebellion or joining their lord in a foreign campaign. And let's not forget the cost of all that armor. A full suit could set a knight back the equivalent of a luxury car today. We're talking about 40 to 100 pounds of metal tailored to fit like a glove. Maintaining this armor was a full-time job in itself. Rust was their arch-nemesis, and armorers were the unsung heroes of the medieval world, ensuring these walking tanks could actually move. Then there were the tournaments, the medieval answer to reality TV. Forget The Bachelor. Knights competed in these events to show off their prowess, win prizes, and maybe catch the eye of a wealthy benefactor. Jousting, the main event, was not just about glory, but also about networking. A win could elevate a knight's status faster than you could say chivalry, while a loss might send them back to their estate licking their wounds and nursing a depleted purse. Behind the scenes, the life of a knight was far from glamorous. While the tales of Arthur and his round table buddies paint a picture of honor and gallantry, real knights had to navigate the treacherous waters of feudal politics. Allegiances were fickle, and a wrong move could see a knight's fortunes change overnight. Many knights struggled to maintain their estates, Bad harvests, costly repairs, or a prolonged war could spell financial ruin. And if they fell out of favor with their lord, they could find themselves stripped of their land and status, forced to live off the generosity of others, or join a band of less than reputable mercenaries. Knights were also bound by a code of chivalry, a concept that sounds great in theory, but was, in practice, about as consistent as medieval plumbing. This code called for knights to be brave, loyal, and courteous, especially towards women. However, the reality was often shaped more by the brutal demands of survival and power plays than any romantic ideals. The rigid structure of feudal society meant that knights, despite their noble status, were often caught in a web of obligations and expectations, trying to balance the ideals of knighthood with the very real pressures of medieval life. So next time you picture a knight in shining armor, remember that beneath the gleaming metal was a person grappling with the demands of duty, loyalty, and survival in a world where the stakes were as high as a castle tower. The glamour of knighthood was often overshadowed by the grit and grind of daily life, a far cry from the fairy tales, but a vital cog in the machinery of medieval Europe. And as we delve deeper into this feudal landscape, keep in mind that even the most romanticized roles were often just another part of the complex, sometimes contradictory, tapestry of history. While knights were busy juggling swords and estate management, peasants were the ones doing the real heavy lifting, or should I say, backbreaking. Welcome to the world of medieval peasants. The true unsung heroes of the feudal system were working hard enough to make a modern-day gym rat look lazy was just a Tuesday. These folks were the backbone, the sinew, and the very mud-spattered lifeblood of the feudal economy, and they did it all with the grace of a marathon runner and the reward of a hamster in a wheel. Now, let's talk serfdom, that delightful arrangement that made indentured servitude look like a summer internship. If you were a peasant, odds are you were a serf, which is basically a fancy way of saying you were tied to the land like a medieval ball and chain. Freedom, that was a luxury for the nobility. Serfs worked the lord's land, paid their dues, and in return got a small slice of earth to call their own, or at least to rent indefinitely. The concept of owning anything was about as foreign as a llama in a jousting tournament. The work-life balance for peasants was as non-existent as a unicorn at a medieval fair. 6 days a week from dawn till dusk, it was all about the grind, ploughing fields, sowing seeds, harvesting crops, and repeating the cycle ad nauseum. Sundays were technically a day of rest, but let's not kid ourselves. With the endless list of chores, a day off meant attending church and maybe squeezing in a quick nap between mending clothes and feeding the chickens. And vacations. The closest thing to a holiday was the occasional feast day, where you might get a break to celebrate a saint's day with a little more bread and a lot more ale. Speaking of food, let's debunk the myth that medieval peasants subsisted solely on gruel. Sure, their diet wasn't exactly Michelin-starred, but it wasn't all gloom and porridge either. Bread was the staple, often made from barley or rye. Wheat was usually reserved for the upper crust, pun fully intended. In addition to bread, peasants dined on pottage, a thick stew of vegetables, and perhaps a hint of meat if the stars aligned, and an animal happened to be available. And let's not forget the occasional fish or dairy product, which added a touch of variety to the otherwise monotonous menu. The medieval diet was rustic, sure, but it was also surprisingly balanced, with plenty of legumes, grains, and even the odd fruit or nut when the season allowed. Peasant revolts. Let's get into that spicy topic, shall we? There's a misconception that medieval peasants were just waiting for the right moment to rise up and overthrow their lords in a blaze of pitchforks and torches. The truth is, revolts were the exception, not the rule, and when they did happen, it was usually a result of extreme pressure rather than a sudden burst of revolutionary fervor. Take the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England, for instance. Triggered by oppressive taxes and economic hardship, it was a flashpoint of anger rather than a coordinated campaign. The revolt saw peasants marching to London, demanding better treatment and lower taxes, only to be met with betrayal and brutal suppression. The moral of the story: serfs weren't revolutionaries by nature. They were just tired of being squeezed like medieval turnips. Economically, peasants were the gears that kept the feudal engine running. Without them, the whole system would have screeched to a halt faster than you can say crop failure. Their labor produced the food and goods that sustained not just their own communities, but also the nobility, who relied on these resources to fund their lavish lifestyles. Peasants were taxed heavily, often paying in kind with a share of their harvest, and they had to endure the whims of both nature and their lords. A bad harvest could spell disaster, leaving them with empty barns and empty bellies, while their lords might still demand the same tribute, regardless of circumstances. It was a precarious existence, like walking a tightrope over a pit filled with hungry wolves, and the wolves were always hungry. Now, don't get me wrong, the medieval world was not devoid of advancement or opportunity. Some peasants did manage to improve their lot, moving up the social ladder to become freemen or even landowners. But these cases were rare, akin to winning the medieval lottery, and usually required a combination of good fortune, hard work, and sometimes a well-timed marriage or inheritance. For the majority, life was a constant struggle, with few prospects and even fewer rewards. So, while knights in shining armor might capture our imagination, it's the peasants, toiling away in anonymity, who were the real MVPs of the feudal system. They didn't have the luxury of chivalry or the allure of courtly love. Instead, they had grit, resilience, and an unyielding spirit that kept the wheels of medieval society turning. Their contributions might not have been celebrated in epic tales or romantic ballads, but without them, the castles would have crumbled, the lords would have starved, and the knights would have had nothing to protect but empty fields. As we continue to uncover the layers of this complex, often contradictory world, let's not forget the unsung heroes who, despite the odds, kept the heart of medieval Europe beating. In the bustling hive of medieval life, where peasants tilled the fields and knights polished their armor, it was the manorial system that provided the glue, or perhaps the duct tape, that held the whole creaky contraption together. Think of it as the medieval version of a planned community, without the HOA fees, but with plenty of fealty requirements. At the heart of each manor was the lord's estate, the medieval headquarters from which all local economic and legal life radiated like spokes on a wheel. This system was as much about geography as it was about governance. A manor typically included the lord's residence, a church, and the surrounding farmland. Peasants, or more specifically serfs, worked the land, with the produce filling both their bellies and the lord's coffers. It was a localized economy in the truest sense, where self-sufficiency wasn't just a hipster buzzword, but a matter of survival. Imagine a world where your neighborhood convenience store was a fellow villager with a particularly bountiful vegetable patch. Now, let's talk numbers. A typical manor covered about 200 acres, roughly the size of 900 football fields for the sports enthusiasts among us. This land was divided into the lord's demesne, land he kept for his own use, and the peasant plots, along with common areas like meadows and forests. The demesne might take up a third of the manor's land, giving the lord a substantial slice of the agricultural pie. The rest was parceled out to the serfs, who worked their own strips of land in return for their labor on the lord's fields. In this medieval model, social mobility was about as likely as a dragon sighting in downtown London. And speaking of labor, let's delve into the delightful world of medieval justice, or perhaps more accurately, medieval justice. In a world without a unified legal code, justice was a patchwork quilt, stitched together by the whims of local lords. The manor court was the epicenter of legal life, presided over by the lord or his steward. Picture a courtroom drama where the jury is your neighbors, and the judge is also your landlord. Forget law and order. This was more law and feudal disorder. Justice was swift, if not always sweet. Petty crimes like theft or trespassing could earn you a fine or a stint in the stocks, where public humiliation was the medieval equivalent of social media shaming. More serious offenses, like murder or rebellion, might land you a one-way ticket to the gallows or a less-than-pleasant session with the village executioner. Let's just say due process wasn't exactly the order of the day. For the average serf, the legal system was less about justice and more about maintaining the status quo, ensuring everyone knew their place in the feudal pecking order. But let's not forget taxes, the medieval bane of every serf's existence. In a world devoid of calculators and spreadsheets, the tax system was a marvel of crude simplicity. Taxes were levied based on what you grew, what you owned, and even who you were. The tithe was a church tax, claiming a tenth of your produce, which might sound like a bargain until you realized just how little you had left over. Then there were the various manorial dues, labor services, payments in kind, and even the charmingly named hiriard, a death tax that required serfs to give up their best beast upon their demise. Talk about adding insult to injury. In this world of makeshift math and creative accounting, peasants were the ultimate multitaskers. They had to juggle their obligations to the Lord, the church, and their families, all while keeping one eye on the weather and the other on their neighbors. It was a balancing act worthy of the finest circus, with the ever-present danger of falling into the abyss of debt or destitution. Yet somehow, this rickety system chugged along, a testament to human resilience and the sheer stubbornness of tradition. But why did it eventually start to crumble? Well, several factors conspired to shake the foundations of feudalism like a medieval earthquake. For starters, the Black Death swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, wiping out up to 60% of the population and causing a labor shortage that sent the price of peasants' work rocketing skyward. Suddenly, serfs had leverage, and they weren't afraid to use it. Meanwhile, the rise of towns and a burgeoning merchant class began to challenge the old ways. As trade expanded beyond the manorial boundaries, money became the new currency of power, slowly replacing land as the ultimate measure of wealth. This shift in economic dynamics, coupled with the increasing centralization of royal power, meant that the feudal system was living on borrowed time. By the end of the medieval period, the once mighty edifice of feudalism was showing cracks, its rigid structures struggling to adapt to a world that was growing more complex, more interconnected, and more, well, modern. But don't fret. This isn't the end of our journey through the labyrinth of medieval life. There are more layers to uncover, more myths to debunk, and more stories to tell about a world that, for all its quirks and contradictions, laid the groundwork for the society we inhabit today. So stick around, because the medieval saga is far from over, and the best tales are yet to be told. The medieval period, a time when the socio-economic landscape was as changeable as the weather, and just as unpredictable. You see, while we've been painting this picture of feudalism with all its quirks and contradictions, it was never a static portrait. The decline of the feudal system was like the final act in a Shakespearean play, complete with unexpected plot twists, dramatic exits, and a cast of characters that would make any historian's heart race. Let's start with the Black Death, the unwelcome guest that swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, leaving devastation in its wake. Picture this, a pandemic that killed an estimated 25 million people, about one-third of Europe's population, within a few short years. The impact was catastrophic, not just on a human level, but economically and socially. With so many peasants gone, the labor force shrank faster than a medieval tunic in a hot wash. Suddenly, the surviving workers found themselves in demand, and they knew it. Wages soared as peasants began to realize that their labor was worth more than the dirt they tilled. This shift in power dynamics was like watching a chess game where the pawns suddenly realized they could checkmate the king. And as if the Black Death wasn't enough of a curveball, enter stage left, the rise of trade and towns. Now, towns were the medieval version of a bustling metropolis, minus the skyscrapers, and with slightly more mud. But they represented something truly revolutionary, the emergence of a merchant class that could rival the old feudal order. With trade routes expanding like medieval highways, goods flowed in from far-off lands, and money, yes, actual currency, began to replace land as the ultimate measure of wealth. For the first time, people could buy their way to power and influence, rather than inheriting it from a crusty old lineage. This was the medieval equivalent of Silicon Valley billionaires disrupting industries with a single app. The decline of feudalism wasn't just an economic shift, it was a cultural earthquake. As towns grew, they became centers of learning and innovation. Universities sprang up, and with them, new ideas that challenged the old ways of thinking. The grip of the church on intellectual life began to loosen, and the seeds of the Renaissance were sown, a time when the rediscovery of classical knowledge would light up Europe like a particularly enlightening lightning bolt. Now, let's debunk some myths, shall we? The romanticized notion of feudalism as a time of noble lords and gallant knights, of damsels in distress and chivalric deeds, is about as accurate as a medieval map of the world. Sure, There were moments of gallantry and grandeur, but they were often overshadowed by the harsh realities of survival, power struggles, and the ever-present threat of upheaval. The truth is, the feudal system was less a harmonious society and more a complex web of obligations, with everyone from kings to peasants playing their part in a grand, often chaotic, dance of fealty and favor. So why do these myths persist in pop culture? Because they tap into something timeless, the allure of a world where honor and valor reign supreme, where the downtrodden can rise against all odds, and where love conquers all. It's a narrative as old as time itself, and one that resonates even today. After all, who doesn't love a good underdog story, especially when it's wrapped in the glimmering sheen of knightly armor? But let's not pretend the legacy of feudalism is all about romantic escapism. There are real lessons to be gleaned from this patchwork past. It reminds us that social structures are not immutable. They are susceptible to change, often in response to unforeseen events or the relentless march of innovation. The decline of feudalism serves as a potent reminder that the world is always in flux, and that adaptability is key to survival, whether you're a medieval serf or a modern entrepreneur. In the grand tapestry of history, feudalism is but one thread, and yet its impact can still be felt today. It laid the groundwork for modern concepts of property, labor, and governance. It reminds us of the importance of resilience and the capacity for reinvention. And while the castles may have crumbled, and the knights have long since hung up their armor, the echoes of their world still resonate, a testament to the enduring human spirit. So as we wrap up our medieval saga, take a moment to appreciate the journey through a world both familiar and foreign, where the past and present intertwine in a dance as intricate as a courtly ball. Because history, with all its twists and turns, is never just about what happened. It's about what it means for us today. And like any good tale, it invites us to reflect, to question, and perhaps most importantly, to learn. In the grand arena of history, few things are as dramatic as a dynasty biding the dust, and the Umayyads certainly took their bow with style. If you were to rewind the clock to the mid-8th century, you'd find the Umayyad Caliphate looking a bit like an overripe fruit, ready to fall with the slightest shake. Enter the Abbasids, stage left, with a promise of inclusivity and change that was as enticing as a free buffet at a political rally. The Umayyad dynasty, which had ruled since 661 CE, was beginning to resemble a tired sitcom. Same old power struggles, same old grievances. Their downfall wasn't just a matter of bad luck. It was a cocktail of unpopular policies and a hefty dose of arrogance. They were the original No New Friends Club, favoring Arabs in their administration, while non-Arab Muslims were left feeling like the plus one at a wedding nobody wanted. This exclusivity didn't exactly win them any popularity contests. Cue the Abbasids, who saw an opportunity in this discontent. Picture them as the savvy political upstarts who knew how to build a coalition. They rallied support from non-Arab Muslims, Shiites, and even some disgruntled Arab tribes. The Battle of the Great Zab in 750 CE was their ticket to the big leagues, where they unceremoniously booted the Umayyads off the stage. It's as if they showed up with a better script, and the audience was more than ready for a new plot twist. Now, here's the kicker. The Abbasids didn't just want to take over. They wanted to rewrite the playbook. So, what's the first thing you do when you're the new boss in town? You change the scenery. In 762 C, the Abbasids packed up their camels and moved the capital from the rather tired Damascus to the fresh, promising landscape of Baghdad. This wasn't just a random dart throw on a map. Baghdad was strategically located near the Tigris River, smack dab in the middle of crucial trade routes between Asia, Europe, and Africa. Think of it as setting up your startup in Silicon Valley, but with fewer lattes and more spice caravans. Building Baghdad was no small feat. It was a 100,000 dinar job. That's about 25 million in modern-day dollars, give or take a few dirhams. The city was designed as a round, fortified masterpiece known as the City of Peace. Though, like any major urban planning project, it came with its share of headaches. Imagine city officials arguing over where the best shawarma stands should go, and you're probably not far off. But what about those governance hiccups? Well, let's just say that starting from scratch is never without its challenges. The Abbasids had to figure out how to rule a diverse population while keeping their new allies happy and their new capital functioning. It was like trying to juggle flaming torches while riding a unicycle. Impressive if you pull it off, disastrous if you don't. The Abbasids had to balance the interests of various religious and ethnic groups without dropping the ball. The Abbasids also had the unique challenge of managing a sprawling empire with varied climates, economies, and cultures. From the deserts of Arabia to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, this was a realm as diverse as a modern-day supermarket aisle. Taxation and trade policies needed to be as meticulously crafted as a fine Persian rug, ensuring the empire didn't unravel at the seams. Despite the rocky start and the logistical nightmares, the Abbasids were determined to turn their empire into a beacon of learning and culture. They were the original Renaissance fair, centuries before the term was even coined. And while the romanticized vision of an enlightened, harmonious society is tempting, the reality was a bit messier. Power struggles, coups, and occasional bloodbaths were part and parcel of maintaining control. After all, you can't have a golden age without a few tarnished bits. So, here we have the Abbasids, stepping onto the historical stage with a grand promise and a literal head start over their predecessors. They had the vision to match their ambition, but the road to becoming one of the greatest cultural and intellectual powerhouses was anything but smooth. And so begins the Abbasid journey, a tale of innovation, intrigue, and the occasional governance blunder. Stay tuned, because the best is yet to come. Now, with the Abbasids determined to shine like the new stars of the Islamic world, they rolled out their piece de resistance, Baghdad. This wasn't just any old city. It was the architectural equivalent of a mic drop. The Abbasids had a vision, and they were willing to spend a cool 833,000 dirhams to bring it to life. Picture a giant circle, a perfect 2-kilometer radius, surrounded by walls that stood taller than a 3-story building. Baghdad was the medieval world's answer to the Apple campus. Sure, the price tag was hefty, but who doesn't love a little urban bling? The Round City, as it came to be known, wasn't just about form, it was about function. The Abbasids wanted a city that could control the vast empire while also symbolizing their power and prestige. It was strategically placed on the Tigris River, a lifeline for trade and communication. Think of it as the ultimate real estate coup, with river views that would make any modern realtor swoon. But was it worth the hype? Well, that's up for debate. The city's circular design was supposed to be a stroke of genius, but let's face it, navigating a circular city without Google Maps was probably a nightmare. Baghdad quickly became a cultural melting pot, the medieval world's Manhattan. It was buzzing with traders, scholars, and artisans from all over the globe. Spices from India, silk from China, and gold from Africa flowed through its bustling markets. The city was an economic powerhouse, fueled by a trade network that spanned continents. It was as if the world had found a new obsession with globalization, centuries before anyone had coined the term. But with prosperity came its fair share of challenges. The influx of wealth and people meant that the city had to constantly adapt and expand, like a teenager growing out of clothes every other month. The Abbasids were not ones to rest on their laurels, though. They were serious about making Baghdad a beacon of learning and innovation. Enter the House of Wisdom, an institution that sounded like a Harry Potter creation, but was the real deal. It was a hub for scholars, philosophers, and scientists who translated works from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources into Arabic. The city was a center of intellectual curiosity, with thinkers who would have given today's TED speakers a run for their money. Baghdad was where the ancient world's knowledge was collected, preserved, and expanded, a veritable Wikipedia of its day. But not everything was sunshine and scholarly debates. Building a city from scratch is never without its hiccups. The Round City, for all its grandeur, had its architectural fails. The marshy land around the Tigris meant that sewage and drainage were constant headaches. Imagine a city where the streets occasionally turned into mudslides. Definitely not the postcard image they were going for. And let's not forget the social dynamics. Baghdad was a cosmopolitan hub, but with diversity came tension. Managing different ethnic and religious groups was like trying to play a game of chess with a board that kept changing shape. The Abbasids had to be politically savvy, balancing power among various factions to avoid the city from turning into a medieval version of a reality TV show. Despite these challenges, Baghdad thrived. Its markets were legendary, filled with goods that boggled the mind. A visitor could find anything from exotic animals to the latest fashion in textiles. The city was a place where trade wasn't just an exchange of goods, but a cultural dialogue. Merchants haggled over prices while sharing stories and ideas, making Baghdad a place where the world felt a little smaller. The economic prosperity of Baghdad wasn't just about trade. The Abbasids implemented a taxation system that would make any modern accountant proud. It was meticulous, tracking everything from land ownership to market transactions. This financial acumen was crucial for maintaining the sprawling empire, ensuring that the coffers stayed full enough to fund more architectural wonders. But with wealth came the eternal problem of inequality. The rich lived in lavish homes, while the poor often struggled to make ends meet, a tale as old as time, proving that some things never change. As the city grew, so did its reputation as a center of culture and learning. Baghdad became the home of poets, musicians, and artists whose works transcended borders. The city had a vibrant cultural scene, with gatherings that were the Instagram of their day. Only instead of selfies, people shared poetry and philosophy. This cultural renaissance was not just about entertainment, but also a form of soft power, showcasing the Abbasids' commitment to arts and knowledge. And while this image of Baghdad as an enlightened paradise is tempting, it's worth remembering that the city was not immune to the darker aspects of power. Political intrigue, espionage, and the occasional bout of palace drama were all part of the package. The Abbasids might have built their empire on promises of inclusivity and innovation, but they were also savvy rulers. They knew that maintaining control required more than just a pretty city. It involved a careful balancing act of diplomacy, military might, and cultural patronage. Yet, for all their efforts, the Abbasids couldn't escape the fact that empires are fragile things. They might have been the darlings of the Islamic world, but even they couldn't predict the challenges that lay ahead. So, as Baghdad basked in its golden age, the stage was set for the next chapter in the Abbasid saga. The city had become a symbol of what was possible when ambition met opportunity, a testament to human ingenuity and the complexities of power. But like any good story, the plot was about to thicken, with new challenges and characters waiting in the wings. Stay tuned, because the history of Baghdad is far from over. As Baghdad basked in its golden age, it was more than just a city of grand architecture and bustling markets. It was a cerebral powerhouse, a beacon of intellectual light in a world often shrouded in medieval shadows. Enter the House of Wisdom, or as we might call it, the OG think tank, an institution that put Baghdad on the intellectual map and made nerdy pursuits all the rage. This was no ordinary library. It was the brainchild of Caliph al-Mamun, who reigned from 813 to 833 CE, a ruler with a penchant for books and an eye for talent. Imagine a place where scholars from diverse backgrounds gathered to translate and preserve the knowledge of the ancients. This wasn't just a book club for dusty tomes. It was a melting pot of ideas where Greek philosophy met Indian mathematics, and Persian science had coffee with Arabic poetry. It was like the Silicon Valley of its day, minus the hoodies and venture capitalists. The House of Wisdom was a statement, a flex even, that the Abbasid Caliphate was serious about becoming the intellectual epicenter of the world. No pressure, right? The translation movement was one of the most ambitious projects of the Abbasid era, with a price tag to match. Translators were paid handsomely, sometimes the equivalent of their weight in gold, which might explain why some of them weren't exactly hitting the medieval gym. This was part of a deliberate strategy to acquire and disseminate knowledge, an investment in intellectual capital that would pay dividends for centuries. And let's be real, who wouldn't want to be paid in gold for translating the works of Aristotle or Euclid? But translating those ancient texts was no walk in the alfalfa field. It was a painstaking process that required a mastery of languages and a deep understanding of the subject matter. Translators like Hunayn ibn Ishaq were the rock stars of their day, bridging cultural and linguistic divides to bring the wisdom of the ages to a new audience. It's like if Google Translate had a PhD in classics, because this was about more than just words. It was about ideas. Enter Al-Khwarizmi, the mathematical maestro who gave the world algorithms and algebra, concepts that would one day make high school students everywhere groan in unison. Born around 780 CE, Al-Khwarizmi was a scholar at the House of Wisdom who revolutionized mathematics by introducing the concept of using zero as a placeholder. A big deal in a world that hadn't quite figured out how to count past 10 without using fingers and toes. He wrote the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, which sounds like a real page-turner, but in reality it laid the groundwork for modern algebra. Then there's Al-Razi, the polymath who wore more hats than a milliner. A physician, chemist, and philosopher, Al-Razi was the kind of guy who'd probably have a field day with a modern science fair. His Kitab al-Hawi was an encyclopedic treatise on medicine that compiled knowledge from various cultures, and his work on chemistry laid the groundwork for future alchemists. He's the kind of historical figure who makes you wonder if he had some sort of time-turner to fit it all in. And let's not forget the astronomical advances. Scholars like Al-Farghani and Al-Battani made significant contributions to our understanding of the cosmos. Al-Farghani's work on the circumference of the Earth was surprisingly accurate, considering they didn't have Google Earth back then, while Al-Battani refined Ptolemy's astronomical theories with calculations that would later influence European scholars. It was as if the Abbasids were peering into the heavens and saying, "Move over, stars. We've got this." All of this intellectual flourishing didn't happen in a vacuum. It required societal and political support, a kind of medieval Kickstarter campaign with the Caliphate as the chief backer. The Abbasids understood that nurturing scholars would enhance their prestige and power. They provided funding, resources, and a relatively stable political environment where ideas could flourish. It was a classic case of enlightened self-interest. By investing in knowledge, the Abbasids were also investing in their own legacy. But let's not romanticize this too much. The political landscape was as rocky as a goat path in the mountains. The Abbasids faced internal strife and external threats that could have derailed their intellectual ambitions. There were power struggles within the Caliphate, as well as pressure from rival dynasties and nomadic tribes who were less impressed with algebra and more interested in land. It was a constant juggling act, and the Abbasids had to keep their eye on the ball, or rather, the sword. So, were these scholars the Silicon Valley startups of their time? In some ways, yes. They were innovators working on the cutting edge of their fields, pushing boundaries and expanding the horizons of human knowledge. But unlike modern tech moguls, they weren't in it for the IPOs or the beachfront properties. Their work was driven by a quest for understanding, a desire to unravel the mysteries of the universe and improve the human condition. In the end, it was this spirit of inquiry and the Abbasid support that turned Baghdad into a beacon of learning and innovation. The stage was set for the next chapter in Baghdad's tale, a city that had become a symbol of what could be achieved when a society valued knowledge and curiosity above all. As the Abbasids continued to navigate the choppy waters of empire building, the ripple effects of their golden age of learning would extend far beyond their borders, influencing cultures and civilizations for centuries to come. Stay tuned, because the story of the Abbasid Caliphate is a tale with many layers, and we're just getting started. The Abbasids had built Baghdad into a cerebral beacon and cultural superstar, but beneath the glimmer of intellectual achievement, political realities were an entirely different stage play, and not exactly a feel-good musical. Picture a sprawling empire, more diverse than a United Nations meeting, with a caliphate that was as much a bureaucratic nightmare as it was a marvel of administration. This wasn't just a stroll in the park. It was more like navigating a labyrinth with a blindfold on. Let's talk politics, Abbasid style. From the get-go, the caliphs inherited an empire so vast it made the Roman Empire look like a cozy neighborhood. They were essentially the CEOs of a multinational corporation, but instead of quarterly earnings reports, they were juggling rebellions, religious factions, and the occasional plague. It was the ultimate multitasking challenge, and not everyone was up to it. Caliphs like Al-Mansur, who ruled from 754 to 775 CE, were master chess players of their time. Al-Mansur recognized that running an empire required more than just divine right. It needed a solid infrastructure. He established the Diwan, a kind of medieval cabinet to handle everything from taxes to military logistics. This was bureaucracy on steroids, with officials who were as indispensable as they were corruptible. Think of it as the original swamp that needed draining, but with fewer Twitter rants and more clandestine meetings. And then there's Harun al-Rashid, the caliph who reigned from 786 to 809 CE, and whose name might ring a bell from asterisk 1000 and One Night's asterisk. While history paints him as the ultimate enlightened ruler, indulging in moonlit poetry readings and intellectual debates, the truth was a tad grittier. Harun's reign saw quite a few power struggles, including the infamous civil war between his sons, Al-Amin and Al-Mamun. The family drama could easily rival a Shakespearean tragedy, with betrayals and conspiracies that would make even Macbeth blush. Harun al-Rashid's court was the epicenter of opulence and political intrigue. The caliph himself was a paradox, a patron of the arts who also had a penchant for ruthlessness when it came to maintaining power. His court was filled with poets, scholars, and of course, spies. The grandeur of his reign was both a strength and a weakness, a double-edged sword that could inspire loyalty or incite rebellion, depending on who was wielding it. Now, let's talk epic fails, because even the mighty Abbasids had their share of oops moments. Take, for instance, the Barmakid family, a powerhouse dynasty that essentially ran the Caliphate's administration. They were the ultimate insiders, until Harun al-Rashid decided to eliminate them in 803 CE for reasons that remain as murky as a Baghdad back alley. Was it jealousy, fear of their rising power? Whatever the reason, it was a classic case of biding the hand that feeds you, and it sent shockwaves through the empire. The Abbasids also faced external pressures that would make any ruler's hair turn grey. The Byzantine Empire was a perpetual thorn in their side, like a neighbor who refuses to turn down their music. Then there were the nomadic tribes, such as the Turks and the Berbers, whose incursions were less about polite diplomatic overtures and more about raiding and pillaging. The caliphs had to juggle diplomacy and defense, a balancing act that was as delicate as it was dangerous. And let's not forget the constant threat of internal dissent. The Abbasid caliphs were sunny, but their Shiite rivals were always lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This religious tension was a powder keg that could explode at any time, and it required deft political maneuvering to keep the peace. The caliphs often found themselves playing both sides against the middle, a risky game that could easily backfire. The Abbasids were also pioneers in the art of propaganda. They knew that to maintain control over such a vast domain, they needed to manage the narrative. This meant presenting themselves as the rightful leaders of the Islamic world, the protectors of the faith, and the patrons of culture and learning. It was a carefully crafted image, one that masked the harsher realities of their rule. But beneath the polished veneer, the wheels of power were greased with realpolitik, and occasionally a bit of blood. Corruption, like a persistent rash, was another issue that plagued the Abbasids. The sprawling bureaucracy they had created was a breeding ground for graft and nepotism. Officials skimmed off the top, lining their pockets while the caliphs tried to keep the ship afloat. It was a tale as old as time, proving that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And yet, despite these challenges, the Abbasids managed to hold onto power for several centuries. Their ability to adapt and innovate was key. They continued to push the boundaries of what was possible, whether it was in the fields of science, art, or governance. But every empire has its limits, and the Abbasids were no exception. The cracks in the foundation were starting to show, and the golden age they had built was beginning to tarnish. As the story of the Abbasids unfolds, it becomes clear that their legacy is a complex tapestry of triumphs and tribulations. They were visionaries who dared to dream big, but they were also flawed leaders who grappled with the same human frailties that have plagued rulers throughout history. The tale of the Abbasid Caliphate is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as compelling as those that came before. Stay tuned, because the best, or perhaps the most tumultuous, is yet to come. And so, as we pick up the thread of the Abbasid saga, we're staring down the barrel of an empire that, despite its past splendor, was about to face a harsh wake-up call courtesy of the Mongol Empire. If historical drama were a genre, this would be its Oscar moment, a sweeping epic of power, betrayal, and inevitable decline. The Mongols, under Hulagu Khan, saw Baghdad not as the jewel of the Islamic world, but as an opportunity, a city ripe for the taking. By the time the Mongols rolled into Baghdad in 1258 CE, the Abbasid Caliphate was like an aging rock band still trying to sell out stadiums, but failing to fill seats. Internal strife, economic mismanagement, and a bureaucracy as tangled as a plate of spaghetti had weakened the once mighty Caliphate. The Mongols, on the other hand, were the new kids on the block with a reputation for ruthlessness. They swept across Asia like a force of nature, and Baghdad was just another stop on their world tour. The siege of Baghdad was not the stuff of romantic legends. It was brutal, swift, and devastating. Hulagu Khan's forces laid waste to the city, leaving it in ruins. The House of Wisdom, that glittering symbol of human intellectual achievement, was not spared. In an act that can only be described as cultural vandalism, the Mongols destroyed countless manuscripts, works of science, philosophy, and art that had been painstakingly collected and preserved over centuries. It was as if someone had pressed delete on the medieval world's hard drive, and the loss was immeasurable. But let's not get too misty-eyed over the destruction. The truth is, the Abbasid Golden Age was already on life support by the time the Mongols arrived. The caliphs had become figureheads, mere shadows of their former glory, as real power had shifted to regional rulers who cared more about their local fiefdoms than the Caliphate's grand vision. The Mongols merely delivered the coup de grace to an empire that had long been unraveling at the seams. In the aftermath, the cultural legacy of the Abbasids was like a phoenix rising from the ashes. Despite the destruction, the intellectual advancements made during their reign could not be entirely wiped out. The Abbasids had laid the groundwork for a global exchange of ideas, and this knowledge had already spread far beyond Baghdad's borders. Their contributions in fields like mathematics, medicine, and astronomy continued to influence scholars in Europe and beyond, long after the Caliphate's political power had crumbled. So, was the Abbasid Golden Age a shining beacon of enlightenment, or just a cleverly marketed myth? Like any good story, it's a little bit of both. The Abbasids did create an era of unprecedented learning and cultural achievement, but it was also an age marred by political intrigue, social inequality, and the occasional bout of good, old-fashioned tyranny. It's a reminder that history is never as neat as we'd like it to be, full of contradictions and complexities that defy easy categorization. Fast forward to today, and the story of the Abbasids serves as a cautionary tale about the rise and fall of empires. The echoes of their story can be heard in the corridors of power around the world, where the same themes of ambition, innovation, and hubris play out on a global stage. Whether it's the rise of new economic powerhouses or the decline of established nations, history has a funny way of repeating itself, like a vinyl record stuck on a familiar groove. And so, as we close the book on the Abbasid Caliphate, we're left with a lingering question. Is the rise and fall of empires an inevitable cycle, a cosmic dance that repeats through the ages, or can we learn from the past and craft a future that breaks the mold? It's a question that has no easy answers, but one that invites us to look at the world with a sense of curiosity, humility, and the hope that perhaps, just perhaps, we can change the script. In the bustling ancient world, where traders and merchants buzzed like bees in a hive, one color stood out as the ultimate status symbol, purple. But before you envision opulent robes and royal thrones dripping in violet splendor, let's take a trip to the less glamorous side of this vivid hue, the murky world of ancient snail farming. Yeah, you heard right. The road to royalty was paved with slime and stench. The Phoenicians, those savvy seafarers from the eastern Mediterranean, were the original purveyors of this highly coveted color. They were like the Louis Vuitton of the ancient world, exclusive, expensive, and oh so elusive. But their secret sauce wasn't a mix of fine spices or exotic herbs. It was the humble murex snail, a little sea creature that looked more like a rock's ugly cousin than a fashion icon. Now, you might be wondering how exactly a snail becomes the centerpiece of a thriving luxury industry. It all started with a peculiar method of extracting purple dye from these seemingly inconspicuous mollusks. The process was as delightful as you'd expect anything involving snails to be. Picture this. Thousands of murex snails were collected, smashed, sorry snails, and left to rot in giant vats under the hot sun. The resulting goo was then processed to extract a few precious drops of dye. It's like the worst smoothie recipe you could imagine, yet it was the foundation of a multi-generational industry. Here's where the magic, or the stench, happens. This wasn't just any purple. This was Tyrian purple, named after the Phoenician city of Tyre, and it was a color fit for gods and emperors. Why? because producing it was as labor-intensive as it was odorous. It took around 250,000 snails to produce just 1 ounce of dye. That's about as many snails as you'd find in a nightmare featuring an infinite garden path. The resulting hue was rich and deep, with a vibrancy that stood the test of time and sunlight, unlike many dyes that faded faster than your average celebrity scandal. But let's debunk a common myth. Purple wasn't the rarest color on the palette. In fact, blue was even harder to come by, but it didn't carry the same cultural weight. Purple's claim to fame was its exclusivity and the sheer effort involved in its production. The dye's intense labor and snail carnage made it worth more than its weight in gold, quite literally. In 300 AD, a pound of Tyrian purple dye could cost as much as 3 pounds of gold. That's a price tag that would make even the most extravagant Instagram influencer blush. Yet, why did people put up with this olfactory assault and pay such exorbitant prices? Social status, baby. Wearing purple was like flashing a Rolex or driving a Ferrari today. It was a visual declaration of wealth and power, a color-coded system where only the elite could participate. In some societies, laws were even enacted to restrict the wearing of purple to certain classes. Rome, in particular, was quite fond of these sartorial rules. If you weren't of a certain rank, you'd better stick to your earthy tones and leave the purple for the Senate. But let's not romanticize the past too much. While the image of emperors wrapped in purple robes is alluring, the reality was more complex. Not everyone was thrilled about the pungent process. Ancient writers like Pliny the Elder didn't shy away from noting the revolting nature of the dye production. In his Natural History, Pliny describes the dyes, foul smell, and unsightly appearance, which makes you wonder if the elite's noses were just as finely attuned as their taste in fashion. So, the next time you see a royal portrait swathed in purple, remember that behind the luxury lay an industry of snail farming that was as much about grit and grime as it was about glamour. The Phoenicians took what was essentially marine roadkill and turned it into a symbol of imperial power. Their legacy is a reminder that even the most opulent of human achievements often have humble and occasionally revolting beginnings. Ah, the wonders of ancient industry, where the line between luxury and lunacy was as thin as the thread used to weave those decadent purple togas. Now, let's sail into the economic seas of the Phoenician dye trade, where every drop of Tyrian purple was worth its weight in, well, snails. This wasn't just any old trade. It was the glittering heart of Phoenician commerce and a masterclass in ancient capitalism. Let's start with the jaw-dropping costs. If you thought today's designer brands were pricey, prepare to have your mind blown. The production of Tyrian purple was so expensive that by 300 AD, it took 3 pounds of gold to buy just 1 pound of dye. Let's put that in perspective. That's roughly 48,000 denarii, enough to pay a Roman soldier for over 13 years. So, when someone walked into a room draped in purple, it was like they were wearing a flashing neon sign that said, "I could buy and sell you all." But where did all this wealth come from? Enter the Phoenicians, those maritime maestros who turned the Mediterranean into their personal playground. They were the Elon Musks of their day, minus the Twitter drama, sailing, trading, and negotiating their way to a dye monopoly that spanned from the Levant to the far reaches of the Iberian Peninsula. Phoenician trade routes were the stuff of legend, crisscrossing the seas like an ancient GPS that always knew the quickest way to a profit. They set up shop in port cities like Carthage, Gadia, modern-day Cadiz, and even as far as modern-day Morocco, creating a network that was tighter than a hipster's skinny jeans. Now, let's debunk another myth. The Phoenicians weren't just lucky to stumble upon these routes. They were strategic wizards. These ancient mariners understood the Mediterranean better than a fish knows water, and they used their nautical prowess to outmaneuver competitors. Their ships, sleek and fast, were the Ferraris of the sea, built to navigate both open waters and tricky coastlines with ease. With a little wind and a lot of cunning, they turned a network of tiny city-states into the ancient world's shopping mall. But wait, there's a twist. The Phoenician monopoly wasn't just about clever navigation and sharp bargaining. They also had a knack for playing the long game. By maintaining tight control over the dye production process and trade routes, they kept prices sky-high and competition low. It was like an ancient aristocracy of color. where they were the gatekeepers to this royal hue. Even the mighty Romans had to tip their togas to the Phoenicians' savvy. However, this monopoly was no bed of roses, more like a bed of seaweed and smashed snails. For the workers who toiled in the dye industry, life wasn't exactly a purple paradise. Imagine spending your days amidst the stench of rotting mollusks, your skin stained by the very dye that symbolized wealth and power. The irony would be delicious if it weren't so pungent. These workers were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsniffed, who bore the brunt of this luxurious trade. While emperors paraded in purple, the laborers who made it all possible were likely just trying to avoid passing out from the fumes. And what about the everyday folks who lived near these dye workshops? Well, let's just say they didn't need to worry about property values, because no one was clamoring to move into a neighborhood that smelled like a seafood market gone wrong. The economic benefits were real, as the industry provided jobs and stimulated local markets, but the social cost was a fragrant reminder that the glory of empire often had a stinky underbelly. In this strange and vibrant tapestry of ancient commerce, the Phoenicians wove a story of ingenuity, monopoly, and yes, a lot of snails. Their control over Tyrian purple wasn't just a triumph of trade. It was a testament to the lengths humans will go to for prestige and profit. So the next time you see a splash of purple, remember the odoriferous origins and the clever mariners who made it all possible. As we continue to unravel this colorful history, one thing is clear. The Phoenicians knew how to turn even the humblest of creatures into the stuff of legend. Now, let's dive into the political wizardry that made Tyrian purple more than just a fashion statement. We're talking about the kind of influence that turns humble sea snails into power brokers. The Phoenicians, those maritime maestros, didn't just trade dye, they bartered influence. The color purple became a currency of power, a diplomatic tool as potent as any treaty or military alliance. Imagine the ancient world as a giant chessboard, with each kingdom and city-state plotting its next move. The Phoenicians were the grandmasters of this game, using Tyrian purple as their secret weapon. This wasn't just about selling dye, it was about controlling who could wear it. By strategically choosing their clients, the Phoenicians influenced who got to look like a god or emperor, and who didn't. Think of it as the ancient version of having a direct line to the best stylists in Hollywood. If you were on good terms with the Phoenicians, you were wearing the red carpet equivalent of purple. And let's not forget the emperors and guards who basked in this violet glow. The color wasn't just for mortal rulers, it was the shade of divinity. In the Roman Empire, emperors swathed themselves in purple not just to show off their wealth, but to align themselves with the divine. By controlling the dye, the Phoenicians indirectly controlled a piece of heaven, or at least the earthly perception of it. Julius Caesar, for instance, was famously draped in a purple toga, which was as much a statement of celestial favor as it was of earthly power. But this wasn't just a one-way street. The Phoenicians were also master diplomats, using their dye to forge alliances and lubricate the gears of ancient politics. By granting or withholding access to their luxurious product, they could tilt the balance of power between rival factions. It was like having a VIP pass to the most exclusive club in town, except this club could determine the fate of kingdoms. Now, let's debunk the myth that the Phoenicians were mere traders. They were, in fact, the original moguls of marketing. They understood a principle that many modern brands still struggle with. Create a product so desirable that people will go to great lengths, sometimes literally across oceans, to obtain it. This wasn't just about snails and dye. It was about creating an aura of mystique and exclusivity. They knew that once purple became synonymous with power, the demand would essentially market itself. You didn't need billboards when your brand was etched into the very fabric of empire, and they were cunning in keeping competition at bay. By maintaining a tight grip on the production process and trade routes, the Phoenicians ensured that their monopoly remained unchallenged. It was a classic case of supply and demand, where they controlled both sides of the equation. If anyone tried to muscle in on their territory, they found that producing Tyrian purple was not just a matter of resources, but of expertise. The Phoenicians had centuries of know-how, passed down like a cherished family recipe, albeit one that smelled like a fish market. But let's not kid ourselves. The romance of purple was built on a foundation as gritty as it was glamorous. Behind the elegant robes and strategic alliances lay a world of hard labor and industrial-scale snail harvesting. The political clout and divine associations were the glossy cover to a story that included back-breaking work and a not-so-pleasant aroma. The Phoenicians may have spun a narrative of luxury and power, but behind it was a tapestry woven with the sweat of countless anonymous hands. In this Game of Thrones, purple was the color of power, and the Phoenicians held the palette. They turned a simple dye into a symbol of imperial might, using their maritime prowess to paint the ancient world in shades of royal ambition. As we dig deeper into this colorful history, remember that the real politic of purple was as much about the people who made it passable as it was about those who wore it. The Phoenicians were more than traders. They were the architects of an empire of color, with a legacy that still echoes in the corridors of history. If the Phoenicians were the architects of an empire of color, then their blueprint was a vibrant map of social and cultural power. But before you get too swept away imagining a world where everyone looked like they just walked off a royal runway, let's get real about the ramifications of this purple obsession. Wearing Tyrian purple wasn't just about looking like you'd stepped out of an ancient vogue. It was about wielding influence and broadcasting your place in the world, or at least your corner of the Mediterranean. First off, let's talk status symbols. In the ancient world, purple was less about fashion and more about flexing the kind of authority that had people bowing and scraping before you. It wasn't just emperors and guards who donned this hue. Civic leaders, military commanders, and wealthy merchants all vied for a piece of the purple pie. It was as if the color itself had been anointed with the power to transform mere status into an unspoken command. The message was simple. If you want to be taken seriously, you wear purple. And let's not forget, the Babylonians, Persians, and even the Israelites were also in on this act, each culture weaving its own storied relationship with the color of kings. But here's the kicker. Purple wasn't just a symbol of opulence. It was also a tool for reinforcing social hierarchies. In Rome, sumptuary laws dictated who could wear what, and purple was strictly reserved for the upper echelons of society. Imagine a fashion police force decked out in togas, ready to slap fines, or worse, on anyone caught flouting these sartorial codes. The Romans, ever the fans of order and regulation, went so far as to reserve certain shades of purple for specific ranks. The toga picta, a richly embroidered garment worn by generals during triumphs, was dyed in the deepest purple, signifying both martial prowess and divine favor. It was like having a custom license plate that read V1CT0 Rye, and was just as subtle. This brings us to a rather amusing aspect of purple's cultural impact, the ancient fashion faux pas. You see, not everyone got the memo about the color's exclusive status. There are tales of merchants and ambitious upstarts caught trying to sneak a bit of purple into their wardrobes, only to face the wrath of the law, or worse, the ridicule of their betters. It was the ancient equivalent of wearing white to someone else's wedding or showing up to a black tie event in a Hawaiian shirt. Sure, you might turn heads, but not for the reasons you'd hoped. Now, let's pivot to a myth that needs busting. The idea that purple was simply the ancient world's version of a fashion statement. In reality, it was a political and religious symbol wrapped in a cloak of luxury. Consider the Byzantine Empire, where the color became synonymous with imperial authority. The phrase, born in the purple, porphyrogenitos, referred to children of reigning emperors, a literal and metaphorical nod to their birthright. This wasn't just about wearing fancy clothes. It was about cementing one's place within a divine order, a celestial hierarchy where earthly power mirrored heavenly mandates. The Byzantines, ever the lovers of pomp and circumstance, took it a step further by incorporating purple into religious iconography. Saints and holy figures were often depicted wearing the color, a visual shorthand for sanctity and divine favor. It was a clever bit of marketing, a way to link the imperial and the sacred in the minds of the populace. If the emperor was God's chosen ruler, then surely his wardrobe should reflect that heavenly appointment. Purple also played a role in significant historical events and cultural shifts. Remember Cleopatra. The Egyptian queen was known for her love of luxury and her strategic use of purple to dazzle Roman leaders like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. Her famously opulent entrance to meet Antony, where she was reportedly draped in purple sails and robes, was more than just a fashion statement. It was a calculated power move. By enveloping herself in the color of royalty and divinity, she was asserting her status and influence on the world's stage. But let's not overlook the darker side of this purple passion. The dye's production was an industry built on the backs of laborers who lived and worked in conditions that were anything but regal. The social cost of this luxury was borne by those who harvested the murex snails, spent long days in odorous workshops, and endured the stigma of a trade that was essential yet socially maligned. It was the ancient version of the diamond industry, where the end product glittered, but the process was anything but glamorous. Yet, despite the stench and toil, the allure of purple endured. Its symbolism transcended borders and epochs, weaving its way into the cultural fabric of civilizations far beyond its Phoenician origins. By the Middle Ages, European monarchs were clamoring for the color, seeing it as a vital accessory to their claims of divine right. The hue had become a diplomatic tool, a way to broker alliances and assert dominance in the ever-shifting landscape of medieval politics. In the grand tapestry of history, Tyrian purple was more than a mere color. It was a narrative thread connecting empires, cultures, and eras. From the bustling ports of Phoenicia to the gilded halls of Byzantium, it inspired both reverence and rivalry, a testament to humanity's enduring fascination with symbols of power and prestige. As we continue to unravel this vibrant history, remember that the story of purple is as much about the people who coveted it as those who created it. The Phoenicians may have been the original color kings, but their legacy is one that echoes across centuries, a reminder that the lines between fashion, power, and politics are often as blurred as the colors in a sunset. And thus, as the purple tide ebbed and flowed, the stage was set for the decline of the Phoenician color monopoly. Like any good drama, it had its fair share of plot twists and unfortunate endings. The industry that had once cloaked emperors and guards in violet splendor began to fade, much like an ancient tapestry left too long in the sun. But what exactly led to the downfall of this once flourishing trade? First off, let's talk about the economic equivalent of purple kryptonite, cheaper alternatives. You see, the Phoenicians weren't the only clever folks around, and others soon caught wind of the lucrative possibilities hidden in marine muck. Enter the rise of plant-based dyes, specifically madder root, which offered a decent red and could be mixed to mimic purple shades. Sure, it wasn't the real deal, but it was significantly less labor-intensive and didn't require 250,000 snails per ounce. Think of it as the ancient knockoff handbag, a little less luxurious, but infinitely more affordable. And then there was the matter of the Phoenician cities themselves, which found themselves at the mercy of changing political and military tides. By the middle of the first millennium BC, these once thriving hubs were under constant threat from larger empires with sharper swords and bigger ambitions. Tyre, the jewel in the Phoenician crown, was besieged by everyone from the Babylonians to Alexander the Great. Turns out, having a monopoly on a stinky luxury item didn't grant immunity from conquest. But Alexander wasn't just after the snails. He was after control. His conquests around 332 BC marked a shift in power that left the Phoenician cities as mere pawns in a larger geopolitical game. As these cities fell under new rulers, the tight-knit trade networks that had made Tyrian purple the toast of the ancient world began to unravel. Imagine trying to run an international business while dodging arrows and catapults. It's a tough gig, even for the most tenacious Tyrian trader. As if political upheaval and economic competition weren't enough, the Roman Empire, that juggernaut of organization and efficiency, waltzed onto the scene with its own ideas about trade and commerce. Once the Romans took a liking to purple, but not necessarily to the Phoenician price tag, they began to explore their own dye production methods. With their penchant for engineering and innovation, it wasn't long before cheaper purple dyes began to circulate, diminishing the exclusivity that had once been the Phoenician trump card. So, was it the end of the line for Tyrian purple? Not quite. The dye retained its cachet for centuries, with Byzantine emperors continuing to flaunt it as a symbol of divine right. But as time wore on, the exclusivity that had once made it so desirable began to erode, and the vibrant industry of purple dye became more of a historical footnote than a booming business. Yet, its legacy. Oh, that's a different story altogether. Fast forward to today, and you'll notice that purple still holds a special place in the pantheon of luxury. Sure, we have no shortage of colors now, thanks to synthetic dyes that can replicate any hue under the sun. but the symbolism of purple remains, a nod to a time when wearing it meant you were a big deal, or at least pretended to be one. It's a color that still whispers tales of power and prestige, reminding us of its illustrious past. And let's not forget the modern echoes of the Phoenician trade. The idea of exclusive luxury, of owning something that sets you apart from the masses, is alive and well. Whether it's designer clothes, high-end electronics, or limited edition sneakers, the concept of exclusivity continues to color our perceptions of status and success. We may no longer be smashing snails for dye, but the allure of owning something rare and expensive is just as strong as ever. In the end, the story of Tyrian purple is a classic tale of rise and fall, of brilliance dimmed by circumstance and competition. It's a reminder that even the most vibrant of industries can find themselves at the mercy of change. Yet, while the Phoenician dye may have faded from the fabric of daily life, its place in the tapestry of human history remains secure. After all, the legacy of a color that once painted the world in shades of imperial ambition is not so easily erased. And so, as we wrap up this colorful journey, remember that behind every piece of history lies a blend of romance and reality, of myth and harsh truths. Long live the Phoenicians, and long live the legend of purple. In the sweltering heart of ancient Arabia, where the sun seems to have a personal vendetta against all living things, there existed a trade network so lucrative it could make modern Wall Street look like a lemonade stand run by toddlers. Welcome to the world of frankincense, a resin so precious it could have been mistaken for unicorn tears, if unicorns were a thing. Forget about gold. In this part of the world, frankincense was the real currency, the ultimate power move, the Rolls-Royce of resins. It's the kind of stuff that had emperors and priests foaming at the mouth, desperate to get their hands on it, and they were willing to pay through the nose. Quite literally, since they burned it by the barrel for religious ceremonies. Now, let's talk about how this aromatic gold was schlepped across the unforgiving deserts. Into the camel, the humped hero of the ancient world. Camels were essentially the Teslas of their time, eco-friendly, long-range, and able to carry hefty loads without breaking a sweat. Well, maybe a little sweat. It was the desert, after all. These creatures were the backbone, or rather the humps, of the frankincense trade, carrying up to 900 pounds of goods over distances that would make anyone's Fitbit explode in protest. A typical caravan might cover around 2,000 miles, taking up to 70 days to reach its destination. Talk about dedication. The trade routes themselves were like the ancient world's version of Amazon Prime, minus the next day delivery, of course. But hey, when you're dealing with a product that was supposedly worth its weight in gold, customers were willing to wait. These routes stretched from the southern Arabian Peninsula, where the frankincense trees grew, all the way to the Mediterranean. The cities along these routes, such as Petra and Palmyra, thrived on the resin trade, serving as the bustling hubs of commerce and culture. But let's not romanticize this too much. The reality was far from a fairy tale. These routes were treacherous, with bandits lurking around every corner. A caravan could be here one day and gone the next, swallowed by sandstorms or waylaid by robbers. It wasn't all sweet-smelling success and easy profits. Merchants faced hefty taxes and tolls, not to mention the occasional territorial skirmish. Yet, the lure of frankincense was irresistible. It was said that the Roman Emperor Nero burned a whole year's worth of frankincense at the funeral of his favorite mistress, Poppaea. Talk about going up in flames. The economic impact of the frankincense trade was monumental. It wasn't just about the resin itself, but the web of commerce it wove. The trade routes facilitated the exchange of ideas, cultures, and technologies, making cities along the way melting pots of diversity. These routes were the arteries of ancient civilization, pumping lifeblood in the form of goods and knowledge across continents. And what about the people who made this all happen? The traders. The unsung heroes of this saga were as diverse as their cargo. They were Arabs, Greeks, Romans, and Persians, all united by the common goal of making a profit. Their lives were a constant balancing act between opportunity and danger, profits and losses, survival and ambition. Now, let's sprinkle a bit of myth-busting magic dust over this aromatic tale. The romantic notion of the noble desert trader might be appealing, but the truth is, these folks were often opportunists, skilled in the art of negotiation, and not above a little deception when necessary. The desert was a harsh mistress, and survival often trumped morality. Frankincense, for all its glory, was a product of its time, a time when luxury was defined by the ability to burn money, quite literally. Its value lay not just in its scent, but in its scarcity and the sheer effort required to transport it. Today, we might scoff at such extravagance, but in the ancient world, it was a status symbol, a testament to power and piety. So, as we delve deeper into this fragrant labyrinth of history, remember that the story of frankincense is not just about a resin. It's about the people, the places, and the persistent pursuit of prosperity in a world where the line between legend and reality was often as thin as a desert mirage. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the rich tapestry of the frankincense routes, where every grain of sand has a tale to tell. Ah, the frankincense trade, where legend and reality collide like two camels at a watering hole. This wasn't just about carting resin from point A to point B. It was an ancient economic juggernaut that had everyone from priests to emperors wagging their tongues and loosening their purse strings. But what made this fragrant commodity so irresistible? Why did even the Romans, with all their grandeur and orgies, scramble for a whiff? First, let's talk about the sheer pull of supply and demand. You see, frankincense wasn't just a pleasant aroma to mask the less-than-pleasant smells of ancient living. It was the Swiss army knife of ancient products. Need to appease the guards? Burn some frankincense. Want to embalm a body? Frankincense is your go-to. Hosting a lavish dinner party? Sprinkle some on the coals. Heck, it even had medicinal uses, like treating everything from indigestion to depression, though I'd wager the cure was mostly psychological. In any case, demand was sky-high and the supply, well, that was strictly limited to the southern Arabian Peninsula. Talk about a seller's market. The allure of frankincense wasn't just about its multiple uses. It was also a status symbol, the ancient equivalent of a designer handbag or a limited edition sports car. Owning frankincense meant you had connections, wealth, and the ability to light your money on fire. Literally, it was rumored that the Roman Senate once considered restricting frankincense imports because they feared it was draining too much silver from the empire. When a product makes politicians nervous, you know it's a big deal. But let's not fool ourselves. The frankincense trade wasn't all floral scents and easy profits. The road to riches was fraught with peril, and the merchants who braved these routes went exactly riding a wave of romantic adventure. Picture this. You're leading a caravan through a desert, the sun baking you alive while sandstorms threaten to turn your journey into a scene from a disaster movie. And if Mother Nature didn't get you, human nature just might. Bandits were the paparazzi of the ancient trade routes, always ready to pounce. Forget the romantic image of a noble desert trader. These folks were more like gritty survivalists, armed with a keen eye for opportunity and a healthy distrust of everyone. Now, about those caravans. They were the stuff of legend, right? Long lines of camels, like a conga line in slow motion, trudging through the sands with their valuable cargo. But let's inject a dose of reality here. Caravans were logistical nightmares. Imagine trying to coordinate hundreds of camels, each with its own personality quirks and digestive issues. And the humans, not much better. Traders hailed from all corners of the ancient world. Arabs, Greeks, Romans, Persians, each bringing their own languages, customs, and bargaining tactics to the table. Misunderstandings were inevitable, and negotiations could easily turn into shouting matches worthy of a daytime talk show. Economically, the frankincense trade was a double-edged sword. On one hand, it brought immense wealth to the cities along its routes, transforming them into bustling hubs of commerce and culture. Petra, for example, wasn't just an architectural wonder. It was a melting pot of ideas and innovations, all fueled by the resin trade. But with great wealth came great responsibility. And by responsibility, I mean taxes. Every city, tribe, and petty king along the route wanted their cut, and traders had to navigate a complex web of tolls and tariffs. It was like dealing with ancient bureaucrats, only with more swords and less paperwork. Politically, the stakes were just as high. Control of the frankincense routes was a power play, a way for rulers to flex their muscles and fill their coffers. Alliances were forged and broken over this trade, with cities vying for influence like contestants on a reality TV show. The Nabateans, for instance, were masters of this game, leveraging their control of the spice routes to become one of the wealthiest kingdoms in the region. Meanwhile, the Romans watched with a mix of admiration and envy, eager to get their slice of the resin pie. So, as we continue to peel back the layers of this aromatic saga, remember that the frankincense trade was a microcosm of the ancient world, a world where economics, politics, and human nature intertwined in a complex dance. It was a time when luxury was defined by the ability to burn money, quite literally, and where the line between legend and reality was often blurred by the shifting sands of the desert. Stay tuned, because the story of frankincense is far from over. There's more to explore, more myths to debunk, and more gritty realities to uncover as we journey deeper into the past. And speaking of blurred lines, it's time to tackle those tales of frankincense cities, where the fragrance flowed like water and prosperity was supposedly as abundant as sand in the desert. These cities are often painted as the ancient equivalents of New York or London, bustling metropolises where commerce never slept. But before we get swept away by the romance of it all, let's dig into the archaeological evidence, or sometimes the glaring absence of it. Take Ubar, for example, often dubbed the Atlantis of the sands. Supposedly a magnificent city built on frankincense wealth, it was said to have been swallowed by the desert, leaving only tales of its grandeur. Adventurous explorers and hopeful archaeologists have been searching for its remains for centuries, armed with little more than a shovel and a dream. In the early 1990s, a team claimed to have found Ubar in Oman, only for further investigation to suggest that what they actually uncovered might have been nothing more than a Mahdist caravan stop. A bit of a letdown, unless you're a die-hard fan of Mahdist caravan stops, of course. So, why do these stories stick around like gum on a shoe? Well, humans love a good mystery, and if you throw in a touch of lost grandeur, you've got yourself a blockbuster narrative. The notion of cities flourishing in the harsh desert, thanks to the booming frankincense trade, is tantalizing. But in reality, many of these so-called cities were more like trading posts, strategically positioned to milk passing caravans for all they were worth. Think less Las Vegas, and more truck stop with a killer view. Archaeologists have uncovered some evidence of trade hubs like Shissa and Ubar, but these often lack the grandeur described in legends. Instead, these sites reveal simpler communities, where the daily grind was more about haggling over camel loads than amassing Frank Sinatra-style fortunes. These places were vital cogs in the trade machine, but they weren't exactly dripping in opulence. The ancient PR machine, much like today, knew how to spin a good yarn. And what about the other supposed frankincense capitals? Well, Petra is indeed a marvel, its rose-red city walls carved directly into the cliffs. But while Petra did thrive on trade, frankincense was just one piece of its economic puzzle. The Nabateans were savvy marketers, and they knew how to hype up their wares, including frankincense. Yet, Petra's prosperity was also fueled by a wide array of goods, from spices to textiles, making it more of a multi-product marketplace than a one-trick pony. Then there's Palmyra, the oasis in the Syrian desert. Like Petra, it was a pivotal trade hub, but calling it a frankincense city is a bit like calling Venice a gondola town. Sure, frankincense passed through, but Palmyra's economic engine ran on the full spectrum of ancient trade goods. The city's wealth was rooted in its strategic location as a crossroads of commerce, and its grandeur was built on more than just aromatic resin. The persistence of these myths is partly due to the seductive allure of a lost golden age. Who doesn't love a good tale of forgotten cities and hidden riches? It's the stuff of legends, the kind of story that keeps history buffs and treasure hunters alike up at night. But reality, often less glamorous, tells us that while these cities were important, they weren't the fantastical empires of wealth that legends suggest. They were practical, gritty, and ultimately human in their ambitions and limitations. Now, let's talk ancient PR, a game of spin that would make even the most seasoned modern political strategist nod in approval. Ancient merchants and rulers knew the power of a good story. A little exaggeration could go a long way in boosting a city's reputation or a product's allure. After all, if you could convince traders that your city was the place to be, or that your frankincense was the finest around, you'd have them lining up at your gates, silver in hand. So next time you hear tales of the lost cities of frankincense, remember to take them with a pinch of salt, and maybe a dash of skepticism. These myths, while captivating, often gloss over the gritty realities of life in the ancient world. A world where survival was often a matter of luck, skill, and the occasional tall tale. But don't let that dampen your enthusiasm. After all, the truth, with all its rough edges, is just as fascinating. Keep those detective hats on tight, because the story of Frankincense is far from over. We've peeled back a layer of myth, but there's still more intrigue buried in the sands, waiting to be uncovered. As we journey onward, we'll continue to explore the rich tapestry of the ancient world, where every grain of resin has its story to tell. And remember, in a world where legends and reality often dance a delicate tango, sometimes it's the gritty truth that holds the most allure. All right, so you've got your detective hats on, and your skepticism dialed up to 11. Good, because we're diving headlong into the swirling sands of ancient Arabia, where trade routes were the arteries of civilization, pumping not just goods, but ideas, cultures, and practices across continents faster than a camel can spit. The frankincense routes were the Silk Road of sense, if you will, and their influence stretched far beyond the desert dunes. First off, let's talk about the religious impact. Frankincense wasn't just a fancy air freshener for ancient temples. It was a key component of religious ceremonies across the ancient world. Think of it as the divine Wi-Fi connecting mortals to their gods. The Greeks, Egyptians, and Romans all burned frankincense in their temples, a practice that wasn't just about sweet-smelling smoke. It was believed to carry prayers to the heavens, a sort of spiritual FedEx for the devout. This wasn't just a fleeting trend, either. We're talking centuries of olfactory devotion, with frankincense riding the trade winds as far as India and China. In fact, the resin was so intertwined with spirituality that the Hebrew Bible mentions it multiple times, cementing its status as the Goda gift for anyone hoping to impress a deity. But frankincense wasn't just about the gods. It had its place at the table too, literally. The trade routes were culinary superhighways, introducing new spices, herbs, and delicacies to far-flung palates. Imagine a Roman dinner party where guests were served dishes spiced with exotic flavors from the East, the ancient equivalent of a Michelin star menu. The exchange wasn't just one way, either. Middle Eastern and Mediterranean cuisines absorbed influences from each other, giving birth to new culinary traditions. So, next time you're enjoying a plate of hummus or a bowl of pasta, remember you owe a nod to those ancient traders who schlepped spices across scorching deserts. Now, onto the intellectual trade. Ideas traveled these routes as eagerly as goods did. Philosophies, scientific knowledge, and technological innovations spread like wildfire, fanning the flames of progress. The Greeks and Romans borrowed heavily from the mathematics and astronomy of the East, while Eastern philosophers, in turn, were influenced by Western thought. This was globalization before it had a name, with scholars hopping from city to city, exchanging scrolls and ideas like intellectual traders at a bustling bazaar. It's no stretch to say that without these ancient trade networks, our modern world might look very different. And speaking of modern parallels, let's take a gander at ancient economic strategies. Those trade routes weren't just dusty paths trodden by camels. They were complex economic systems that would make today's MBAs sit up and take notes. Ancient merchants were the original free marketeers, driven by supply, demand, and the occasional hostile takeover. The Nabateans, for instance, were masters of logistics, turning Petra into a trade hub that rivaled Wall Street, minus the skyscrapers, of course. They controlled the flow of goods with an iron fist, setting prices and dictating terms like seasoned hedge fund managers. Meanwhile, the Romans, never ones to shy away from a good business opportunity, implemented trade policies that would look right at home in a modern boardroom. They set up taxation systems along trade routes, ensuring that a steady stream of revenue flowed into the imperial coffers. It was a delicate balancing act, though too much taxation risked driving traders away, while too little meant missing out on precious income. Sound familiar? Yep, the same fiscal tightrope that nations walk today. But let's not ignore the social impact. Trade routes were melting pots long before New York claimed the title. Cities like Petra and Palmyra were bustling cosmopolitan centers, where you could hear Greek, Aramaic, Latin, and Arabic all in the same marketplace. This cultural cross-pollination led to a rich tapestry of art, architecture, and literature. The fusion of styles is evident in the remnants of ancient cities, where you can see Greco-Roman columns standing alongside Eastern arches and motifs. It's like a historical mashup album, where diverse influences come together to create something entirely new and exciting. Yet, despite all this romanticism, let's not put on rose-tinted glasses. The ancient world was as harsh as the desert sun, and the trade routes were fraught with peril. Banditry, extortion, and political intrigue were as much a part of the landscape as the sand dunes. Merchants had to navigate a labyrinth of shifting alliances and power struggles, often paying bribes or protection money to ensure safe passage. And if that wasn't enough, Mother Nature herself could turn on a dime, with sandstorms capable of swallowing a caravan whole. So much for the romance of the open road, eh? And here's another zinger for you. These merchants, often celebrated as heroes of commerce, were also master opportunists. They knew how to play the game, leveraging scarcity and demand to their advantage. It was the ultimate hustle, where survival often depended on your wits as much as your wares. These guys would have fit right in on the trading floors of any modern stock exchange. So, as we continue to unravel the tangled threads of these ancient trade networks, remember that they were more than just dusty pathways through the desert. They were vibrant, dynamic systems that shaped the world in ways that continue to resonate today. The routes were conduits for culture, commerce, and innovation, laying the groundwork for the interconnected world we know now. And while the myths of lost cities and legendary traders add a touch of glamour, the reality is that the true legacy of these routes lies in their ability to bring people, ideas, and cultures together in a way that was nothing short of revolutionary. Stay tuned, because we're just getting warmed up. There's more to uncover, more myths to bust, and more truths to reveal as we dig deeper into the sands of time. Whether you're a history buff or a casual listener, there's plenty more intrigue to come. So, keep those hats on, because the story of the trade routes is far from over, and there are still plenty of secrets left to unearth. All right, still with me as we dust off the last remnants of ancient sand from our shoes. Good, because it's time to take the final steps on our aromatic journey through history. We've traversed the rugged terrains of the Frankincense routes, marveled at the hubbub of bustling trade cities, and now, let's bring it all back to the present day. What do these ancient trade routes tell us about the world we live in today? More than you might think. First up, let's chat about globalization. The Frankincense routes were the original globalization blueprint, centuries before we even had a term for it. They connected disparate cultures, economies, and religions over thousands of miles. A feat impressive enough to make even the most jaded corporate executive take notice. These routes were the lifeblood of ancient commerce, the veins through which not only frankincense flowed, but also ideas, languages, and customs. It's like the internet of the ancient world, albeit a tad slower. Think dial-up speeds with a side of camel dust. The cities along these routes, like Petra and Palmyra, were akin to today's global cities. New York, London, Tokyo, vibrant melting parts of activity where the world came together to do business. And let's not forget about sustainability. In a world where the words eco-friendly and carbon footprint are bandied about with the frequency of a Kardashian Instagram post, the ancient trade routes offer a lesson in resource management. The people of ancient Arabia knew a thing or two about sustainable practices long before it became trendy. They had to. When you're operating in a desert environment, waste not. Want not is more of a survival strategy than a lifestyle choice. The camel caravans were the ultimate in efficiency. Imagine a vehicle that produces zero emissions, requires minimal maintenance, and can survive on the barest of essentials. Eat your heart out, Elon Musk. Here's a zinger for you. The trade in frankincense was a double-edged sword of sustainability. On one hand, it was a renewable resource. The boswellia trees that produced this precious resin were carefully tended and harvested, ensuring a steady supply without depleting the source. On the flip side, the demand for frankincense was so great that overharvesting became a real threat. Sound familiar? It's a tale as old as time, a cautionary story about the delicate balance between supply and demand that echoes in today's debates over environmental conservation and resource management. Now, onto the theme of luxury goods. The ancient obsession with frankincense mirrors our modern-day fixation on luxury items. Back then, burning frankincense was the ultimate status symbol, a way to show off your wealth and piety. Fast forward a couple of millennia, and not much has changed. Whether it's a designer handbag, a flashy car, or yes, even that scented candle on your desk, luxury goods remain a testament to our enduring love for extravagance. But here's the kicker. the true cost of these items often goes unnoticed. For frankincense, it wasn't just the price tag, but the perilous journey it endured to reach the hands of Roman elites. Today, the supply chains for luxury items can be just as convoluted and fraught with ethical dilemmas, from labor practices to environmental impact. So, what can we learn from the legacy of the frankincense routes? For starters, the importance of looking beyond the surface. The gleam of luxury often belies the gritty realities of production and trade. The frankincense routes remind us that behind every opulent purchase lies a complex web of human endeavor, political maneuvering, and environmental consideration. They also serve as a testament to the ingenuity and resilience of those who came before us, who navigated the harshest of climates and the trickiest of political landscapes to bring a little bit of heaven to earth. In the grand tapestry of history, the frankincense trade is a thread that weaves together the past and present, offering lessons in globalization, sustainability, and the timeless allure of luxury. It's a story of human ambition and ingenuity, of myth and reality intertwined, much like the fragrant smoke that once curled towards the heavens in ancient temples. As we wrap up our journey, consider the scented candle flickering on your desk right now. Its gentle glow and comforting aroma are a luxury we often take for granted. Yet behind its simplicity lies a legacy of commerce, culture, and human connection stretching back thousands of years. So next time you catch a whiff of frankincense, remember the stories it carries, the stories of traders, cities, and civilizations, each with its own tale to tell. And there you have it, folks. We've trekked through the sands of time, unraveled the mysteries of the frankincense routes, and emerged with a fresh perspective on our modern world. Whether you're a history buff or just someone who enjoys a good scented candle, I hope this journey has sparked a new appreciation for the legacy of ancient trade. Until next time, keep your curiosity burning as brightly as a Roman altar, and remember that history is always closer than you think. The Byzantine Empire knew how to throw a party. In fact, they might have invented the concept of go big or go home, and they certainly didn't skimp on the gold leaf. If you think the Oscars are a bit much, with their endless speeches and designer gowns, wait till you hear about Byzantine court ceremonies. These weren't just events. They were earth-shaking extravaganzas designed to make the gods of Mount Olympus look like bargain hunters at a flea market. So what was the deal with these Byzantine spectacles? Well, let's rewind to the empire's golden era, the time when Constantinople was the glittering jewel of the Mediterranean. This was the 9th to 12th centuries, a period when emperors like Basil Roman II, known as the Bulgar Slayer, were not shy about flexing their imperial muscles. The Byzantines were masters of the art of showing off, and their court ceremonies were the ultimate expression of imperial swagger. First off, let's talk about the money. These ceremonies were not cheap. They were like the Super Bowl halftime show, the Met Gala, and a royal wedding all rolled into one, with a price tag to match. A single ceremonial outfit for an emperor could cost as much as $1,000 solidi, that's about $200,000 US today. And that's just for one outfit. Multiply that by the number of court officials, foreign dignitaries, and assorted hangers-on, and you're looking at an eye-watering sum that could probably buy you a small kingdom. But why go to all this trouble and expense? The answer is simple: politics. In a world where power was often as fragile as a snowflake in a heat wave, the Byzantines used these ceremonies to remind everyone exactly who was in charge. The emperor, after all, was not just a ruler. He was God's representative on earth. And what better way to demonstrate divine favor than with a lavish display of wealth and power? These ceremonies were meticulously choreographed affairs, down to the last golden thread. They featured a dizzying array of rituals, from the emperor's entrance, which was often accompanied by a choir singing hymns in Greek, to the presentation of gifts, which could include everything from exotic animals to precious jewels. Every detail was designed to reinforce the emperor's status as the ultimate authority. It was like a live-action chess game, where every move was calculated to maintain the delicate balance of power. Of course, these ceremonies weren't just about impressing the locals. The Byzantines were keenly aware of the importance of international relations, and these events were a prime opportunity to dazzle foreign ambassadors. Imagine being a diplomat from some far-flung kingdom, stepping into the great palace for the first time. You'd be greeted by a sea of glittering mosaics, towering columns, and the overwhelming scent of incense. It was sensory overload in the best possible way, designed to leave you in no doubt about the might of the Byzantine Empire. But beneath all the glitz and glamour lay a stark truth. The empire was constantly under threat. Whether it was rival factions at home or hostile neighbors abroad, the Byzantines were always on guard. The ceremonies, therefore, served a dual purpose. They were a celebration of imperial power, yes, but they were also a reminder to anyone watching that the Byzantines were not to be trifled with. It was a classic case of speak softly and carry a big stick, except in this case, the stick was made of gold and encrusted with pearls. Now, let's debunk a few myths while we're at it. It's easy to romanticize these ceremonies as the ultimate expression of medieval opulence, but the reality was far more complex. Behind the scenes, the Byzantine court was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing, with courtiers jockeying for power and influence. The ceremonies were as much about internal politics as they were about external diplomacy. A well-timed gift, a subtle nod, or a whispered word could make or break a career. And let's not forget the sheer logistical nightmare of organizing these events. Imagine trying to coordinate hundreds of people, each with their own agendas and egos, all while maintaining the illusion of perfect harmony. It was like herding cats, except the cats were wearing ermine robes and demanding five-star treatment. Yet somehow, the Byzantines pulled it off, time and time again, a testament to their organizational prowess and stubborn determination. In the end, the Byzantine court ceremonies were a dazzling spectacle, a masterclass in the art of political theater. They were a reflection of the empire's strengths and weaknesses, a reminder that beneath the glittering surface lay a complex web of power and ambition. So next time you're watching an awards show and thinking it's all a bit over the top, spare a thought for the Byzantines. They were the true pioneers of pomp and circumstance, and they knew better than anyone that sometimes more really is more. Of course, the Byzantine court wasn't just about the emperor's dazzling entrance or the jaw-dropping opulence that could make even the most lavish Hollywood red carpet seem like a backyard barbecue. No, these ceremonies were a finely tuned orchestration where every detail was a deliberate move in an elaborate power play. Picture a chessboard where the pieces aren't just knights and bishops, but living, breathing courtiers, each with their roles and ranks, all under the watchful gaze of the emperor. This wasn't mere ceremony. It was high-stakes political theater. Now, let's talk wardrobe. Forget the idea that clothes make the man. In the Byzantine court, clothes made the emperor a living deity. The emperor's wardrobe wasn't just about looking good. It was a walking billboard of celestial authority. Take the loros, a long, jewel-encrusted scarf that wrapped around the emperor's body. This wasn't your grandma's knitted number. It was a sparkling manifesto of power, a declaration that said, "I am ordained by God, and I have the bling to prove it." The cost, a cool one, 500 solidi, roughly equivalent to $300,000 today. This sartorial splendor wasn't just for show. It was a strategic maneuver to remind everyone who was the top dog, both on earth and in heaven. But let's not forget the supporting cast in this imperial drama, the eunuchs and courtiers, the real power brokers behind the scenes. You might think of eunuchs as mere footnotes in history, but in the Byzantine Empire, they were the kingmakers. These men, often castrated before puberty to ensure their loyalty and inability to produce heirs, rose to positions of immense influence. They were the emperor's confidants, the gatekeepers to his favor, and sometimes the puppet masters pulling the strings from the shadows. Names like Basil Lecapinos and John the Orphanatrophos might not ring a bell, but trust me, they wielded enough power to make a Game of Thrones villain look like an amateur. Courtiers, too, had their parts to play in this grand performance. They were the emperor's eyes and ears, whispering secrets and gathering intelligence. Their roles were as much about survival as they were about service. In a world where a well-timed compliment could be as lethal as a dagger, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent was an art form. And while some might have seen these courtiers as sycophants, let's give them a little credit. Navigating the Byzantine court was like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, and they did it with style. Every move in these ceremonies was choreographed with the precision of a master conductor leading an orchestra. The emperor's entrance, often accompanied by a choir singing hymns in Greek, was just the overture. Next came the parade of officials, each taking their place according to rank, a visual hierarchy of power. The megas domesticos, the grand general of the empire, might be followed by the Largathetes tu Dramu, the minister of the roads, each rank carefully orchestrated to reflect their status. It was like watching a living tableau, each position a reminder of the empire's intricate power dynamics. And let's not overlook the economic context of these spectacles. Organizing such events was a financial juggernaut, but it was also a savvy investment. By showcasing their wealth and organizational prowess, the Byzantines broadcasted a message far beyond their borders. They were prosperous, powerful, and not to be trifled with. It was a classic case of spend money to make money, as these displays often secured alliances and deterred potential adversaries. The cost might have been astronomical, but the payoff, political stability and international prestige, was worth every solidus. But let's not get too swept up in the romance. The reality was anything but glamorous. Behind the scenes, the Byzantine court was a hotbed of intrigue and backstabbing. Loyalties shifted like sands in a desert storm, and today's ally could be tomorrow's enemy. The stakes were high, and the penalties for losing the emperor's favor were severe. A single misstep could send you from the heights of power to the depths of obscurity, or worse. It was a cutthroat world, and only the shrewdest survived. And then there's the myth-busting. It's tempting to see these ceremonies as the ultimate glittering spectacle, but the truth is, they were also a reflection of the empire's fragility. The more elaborate the display, the more it signaled underlying vulnerabilities. The Byzantines understood that appearances could be deceiving, and they wielded this knowledge like a weapon. In a world where perception often trumped reality, they mastered the art of illusion, crafting a narrative of invincibility even as threats loomed on every horizon. In the grand scheme of things, Byzantine court ceremonies were more than just displays of wealth and power. They were a microcosm of the empire itself, a delicate balance of tradition and innovation, a dance of diplomacy and deception, a testament to human ambition and folly. So next time you find yourself caught up in the latest political drama or celebrity scandal, remember the Byzantines. They wrote the book on spectacle and intrigue, and their lessons echo through the ages, reminding us that in the game of power, the stakes are always high, and the rules are always changing. While the Byzantine court ceremonies were undoubtedly the Oscars of antiquity, they required a bankroll that would make even the wealthiest medieval monarch clutch their pearls. Now, you might be wondering how the Byzantines managed to fund these epic displays without resorting to loan sharks or a GoFundMe campaign. Spoiler alert, it wasn't easy, and it involved a mix of savvy economics, strategic trade routes, and the occasional creative accounting trick that would make modern tax evaders green with envy. Let's start with the Byzantine tax system, the not-so-secret sauce that kept the imperial coffers brimming. Picture a tax collector who could charge you not just for your land, but also for your livestock, your produce, and even the number of olive trees in your backyard. This wasn't just a simplistic pay-your-dues situation. It was a complex web of fiscal obligations that rivaled a three-dimensional chess game. The cornerstone of this system was the land tax, known as the Karmakian, which accounted for a hefty chunk of the empire's revenue. It was a bit like having the IRS on steroids, and it ensured that everyone, from the wealthiest landowner to the humblest farmer, contributed to the imperial part. But taxes alone couldn't cover the cost of a single laurose, let alone an entire ceremony. And to the trade routes, the economic lifelines that connected Constantinople to the farthest corners of the known world. The bustling markets of the capital were a melting pot of cultures and commerce, with goods flowing in from Europe, Asia, and Africa. Silk from China, spices from India, and amber from the Baltic were just a few of the treasures that passed through Byzantine hands, each transaction bringing in customs duties and trade levies. In a way, the Byzantines were the original middlemen, skimming a little off the top of every deal and filling their coffers with the proceeds. Then there was the matter of creative accounting, a Byzantine specialty that would make modern accountants either weep with joy or run for the hills. The empire had a knack for squeezing every last solidus out of its resources, employing a system of summatia, or alliances, which often involved financial arrangements that defied conventional logic. Need to fund a war? Just dip into the church treasury and promise to pay it back later. want to impress visiting dignitaries, reallocate funds from other departments, and hope no one notices until after the party. It was a bit like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle, but somehow it worked, at least most of the time. But this financial wizardry came at a cost. The Byzantine economy, while robust, was a delicate beast that required constant attention and occasional intervention. Inflation was a persistent threat, especially when emperors got a little too enthusiastic with the minting of new coins. And while the trade routes were lucrative, they were also vulnerable to disruption. A single pirate attack or a particularly harsh winter could send ripples through the economy, reminding everyone that the empire's prosperity was as fragile as a Fabergé egg. So, were these extravagant ceremonies sustainable in the long run? That's the million-saladus question. On the one hand, they were a vital tool of statecraft, reinforcing the emperor's authority and projecting an image of strength and stability. They were the medieval equivalent of a PR campaign, and in that sense, they were worth every penny. On the other hand, they placed a significant strain on the empire's resources, diverting funds from other critical areas like defense and infrastructure. It was a precarious balancing act, and one that required constant vigilance and a fair bit of luck. As for the long-term impact, well, history has a funny way of catching up with even the most opulent of empires. The Byzantine economy, while impressive, was not invulnerable, and the pressures of maintaining such grandeur eventually took their toll. The empire faced financial crises, wars, and even the occasional bout of civil unrest, each one chipping away at the carefully constructed facade of wealth and power. In the end, very ceremonies that once symbolized imperial might became a reflection of its vulnerabilities, a reminder that even the most glittering of spectacles can hide a multitude of sins. And let's not kid ourselves. There was an undeniable allure to these ceremonies, a seductive charm that captivated everyone who witnessed them. They were the ultimate expression of Byzantine culture, a dazzling display of art, music, and ritual that left a lasting impression on all who attended. But beneath the surface, they were also a testament to human ambition, a reminder that the pursuit of power often comes with a hefty price tag. The Byzantines understood this, perhaps better than anyone, and their legacy is a testament to the enduring allure of spectacle and the complex dance of economics and politics that makes it possible. So, as we wrap up this chapter of Byzantine extravagance, let's take a moment to appreciate the empire's remarkable ability to maintain this delicate balance, even as the world around them changed at a dizzying pace. The Byzantines might have been masters of illusion, but they were also realists, acutely aware of the challenges they faced and the costs of their ambitions. And in that sense, their story is as relevant today as it was 1,000 years ago. A reminder that in the grand theatre of history, the line between triumph and disaster is often razor-thin. And speaking of thin lines, let's pivot to the everyday folks, the unsung heroes who kept the Byzantine machine humming while the emperors were busy playing dress-up in their glittering palaces. Life in Constantinople, or as the locals might have affectionately called it, the city where reality checks came with an overdraft, was a study in contrasts. On one side, you had the Great Palace, a sprawling complex of unimaginable opulence where golden mosaics gleamed under candlelight, and the scent of exotic spices wafted through the air. On the other, you had the bustling streets, where the common people lived lives that were anything but fairy tales. The truth is, while the emperors were busy dazzling foreign dignitaries with silk and song, the average Byzantine citizen was more concerned with the price of bread than the price of the emperor's latest fashion statement. Let's talk numbers. The cost of wheat, a staple of the Byzantine diet, could fluctuate wildly due to factors like bad harvests or, heaven forbid, a war interrupting supply lines. In a bad year, the price of a modius, about 8. 7 liters of wheat could skyrocket, which meant tough times for those already living on the edge. For many Byzantines, the daily grind involved navigating the labyrinthine streets of Constantinople, where the smell of fish from the bustling markets mingled with the cries of street vendors, peddling everything from pottery to textiles. The city was a melting pot of cultures and commerce, but it was also a place where poverty and prosperity sat side by side in a precarious dance. While the elite wined and dined in their marble halls, the common folk often faced the harsh realities of overpopulation, inadequate sanitation, and the ever-present threat of disease. The Justinian plague of the 6th century, for instance, wiped out an estimated 25-50 million people across the empire, a stark reminder that not all that glitters is gold. So why the disconnect between emperor and everyman? Part of it lies in the very architecture of Byzantine society, a rigid hierarchy where power was concentrated at the top, and everyone else was left scrambling for scraps. The emperor might have been seen as God's representative on earth, but for the average citizen, divine favor didn't exactly pay the bills or fill their bellies. Instead, what mattered most was the ability to adapt, to find ways to survive, and if you were lucky, to thrive in a city that could be as unforgiving as it was magnificent. Yet, it wasn't all doom and gloom. The Byzantines were nothing if not resourceful, and they found ways to make the most of their circumstances. Artisans and craftsmen were the backbone of the economy, producing everything from the intricate mosaics that adorned church walls to the finely woven silks that were the envy of Europe. These were people who understood the value of hard work and perseverance, who knew that, while they might not dine on peacock tongues or wear robes of purple, they could still carve out a life of meaning and purpose. As for the myth of the ever-glorious Byzantine Empire, let's not forget that even the most well-crafted narrative has its cracks. Take the Great Palace itself, a marvel of engineering and design, yet a place that required constant upkeep and repair. Primary sources tell us that by the 10th century, parts of the palace complex were already in disrepair, a reflection of the empire's shifting fortunes. It was a bit like owning a vintage car, beautiful to look at, but a nightmare to maintain. Perhaps the most telling aspect of Byzantine life was the sheer resilience of its people. Whether they were toiling in the fields or trading in the markets, Byzantines understood that life was a series of ups and downs, and that the key to survival lay in adaptability and community. While the emperor might have been the face of the empire, it was these everyday citizens who were its beating heart, the ones who kept the wheels turning and the fires burning. And let's talk about those primary sources, the dusty old manuscripts and chronicles that lift the veil on Byzantine life. Works like the De Ceremonies by Emperor Constantine Roman VII give us a peek behind the imperial curtain, detailing everything from the minutiae of court etiquette to the elaborate choreography of state ceremonies. But read between the lines, and you'll see hints of tension, of a society grappling with its own contradictions. The Byzantines might have perfected the art of spectacle, but they also knew that every performance had its closing act. So, as we continue our journey through the glittering yet gritty world of Byzantine court life, let's keep our eyes open and our minds sharp. There's more to discover, more myths to debunk, and more truths to uncover. After all, history isn't just a collection of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative that invites us to question, to explore, and to learn. And in the grand tapestry of the Byzantine Empire, every thread tells a story, one of ambition and adversity, of splendor and struggle, and of a people who, against all odds, left an indelible mark on the world. As we unravel the opulent tapestry of Byzantine court ceremonies, it's time to step back and see how these spectacles reverberated far beyond the empire's own borders. Imagine, if you will, a medieval Instagram feed, sans selfies, but packed with envy-inducing content. The Byzantine Empire, strutting its stuff with those glittering ceremonies, was the ultimate influencer of its day, setting trends that caught on across Europe and even into the Islamic world. Take, for example, the Russian Tsars. When the Grand Princes of Kiev first caught a glimpse of Byzantine ceremonies, they were astounded, so much so that when Prince Vladimir of Kiev converted to Christianity in 988, he modeled his court after Byzantium's, adopting the ceremonial grandeur like a kid in a candy store. The Russians didn't just copy the aesthetic. They absorbed the whole package, rituals, religious iconography, and even the architectural style of their churches, echoing the Hagia Sophia's majesty. It was cultural appropriation on a grand scale, but rather than a lawsuit, it cemented a diplomatic alliance. Fast forward to the 13th century, and you'd find Western Europe taking notes too, especially as the Crusaders got an eyeful of Byzantine finery. The Holy Roman Empire, for instance, borrowed elements of Byzantine ceremonial protocols to bolster its own imperial image. Even England's Henry Roman VIII, centuries later, emulated the Byzantine blend of ritual and raw power. though thankfully without the eunuchs. These borrowed rituals helped legitimize rulers, portraying them as divinely ordained, a handy trick for monarchs with shaky claims to the throne. But let's not forget that all this ceremonial splendor masked an empire teetering on the brink. By the 13th century, the Byzantine Empire resembled a once glorious mansion in dire need of a renovation it couldn't afford. The Fourth Crusade in 1204 was the nail in the coffin, as crusaders, supposed allies, went rogue and sacked Constantinople. This wasn't a gentle, we're just passing through type of visit, more like a frat party gone horribly wrong. The city was looted, its treasures scattered across Europe, marking a turning point in Byzantine fortunes. Despite regaining the city in 1261, the empire was a shadow of its former self. Its once formidable economy was reduced to a house of cards, and the grandeur of court ceremonies became a memory rather than a reality. By the time maimed Roman II, the Ottoman Sultan, breached Constantinople's walls in 1453, the Byzantine Empire was more a ghost story than a global power. The ceremonious pomp had fizzled to a flicker, unable to hold back the tide of history. Yet, there's a certain romance to the fall of the Byzantine Empire, a wistful nostalgia for a world of silk and incense, where the line between heaven and earth seemed to blur in the emperor's court. But let's not romanticize it too much. At the heart of it, these ceremonies were a survival strategy, a way to project power in a world where might was often right. They were dazzling spectacles with a practical purpose, ensuring political alliances and deterring enemies. In that sense, the Byzantines were the original spin doctors, masters of image crafting long before PR firms got involved. So, what can modern societies learn from these ancient extravaganzas? For one, that spectacle, while captivating, is often a smokescreen. Today's political rallies and state dinners might lack the Byzantine flair, but serve a similar purpose, reminding us who's in charge while glossing over the more inconvenient truths. It's a reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and sometimes, the grander the display, the more it conceals. Moreover, Byzantine legacy teaches us about resilience and adaptability. Despite their eventual collapse, the Byzantines left an indelible mark on history, influencing art, architecture, and governance. Their ability to blend different cultures and ideas into a cohesive empire is a lesson in the value of diversity, something that resonates in our globalized world. In the end, the Byzantine court ceremonies were a reflection of the empire itself, a complex interplay of power, politics, and pageantry. They were a potent mix of illusion and reality, a reminder that the pursuit of power is as much about perception as it is about substance. And while the Byzantine Empire may have crumbled, its legacy continues to shape our world, a testament to the enduring power of spectacle and strategy. As we close this chapter on Byzantine court life, let's remember the lessons they left behind. History, after all, is not just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting the present and a map guiding the future. The Byzantines understood that, weaving their legacy into the very fabric of time. And that, my friends, is a spectacle worth pondering. Wake up to the smell of smoke and salt, your wooden longhouse creaking like an old ship at sea. The dawn's light filters through the tiny gaps in the thatched roof, and it's time to start another day as a Viking in 10th century Scandinavia. But hold your longship, Thor. You're not just a sword-wielding marauder with a penchant for plunder and horned helmets. Actually, scratch the horned helmets entirely. They're about as real as a unicorn on a unicycle. Let's be honest, life as a Viking is a bit more nuanced than the blockbuster movies make it out to be. For starters, you've got to balance farming, trading, and the occasional raiding. Think of it as your very own Nordic multitasking exercise. The truth is, if you spent all your time pillaging, you'd miss out on the very unglamorous but economically essential task of farming. That's right. Before you can raid, you need to feed your family and yourself. The economy in Viking society is a mixed bag, akin to your modern-day juggling act with a side of strategic chess. Farming is your bread and butter, literally. You've got barley and rye to sow, and don't forget those sheep and cattle. Milk doesn't grow on trees, after all. Your farm is your fortress, and its productivity is what keeps your household afloat. There's a reason the Old Norse word for wealth is fe, which also means cattle. Cows equal cash, folks. Now, let's talk currency. You're not working with paper bills or credit cards here. Nope, your transactions are a bit more tangible. Silver is the name of the game, often in the form of hacksilver, pieces of silver hacked from larger objects, weighed and traded. It's like carrying around a pocket full of change, but each piece is a different shape and weight. It seems chaotic by today's standards, but hey, it worked. And then there's the longship, the sleek warhorse of the sea. It's the Viking equivalent of a Ferrari, if Ferraris were made of oak and powered by wind and muscle. The craftsmanship is top-notch, and it better be because a longship is a major investment. You're talking about 15,000 man-hours to build one of these beauties, and that's not including the cost of materials. Oak doesn't just grow on trees. Well, technically it does, but you get the point. The longship is essential for both trade and raiding. Trading might not sound as exciting as raiding, but it's a critical part of your economic survival. You're traveling to trade centers like Hedeby and Burka, where you can swap furs and amber for silver, silk, and spices. It's a 10th century marketplace, complete with the haggling and hustle. Now, raiding has its own kind of allure. You're not just after gold and glory, you're securing resources and status. But let's not sugarcoat it. Raiding is risky business. You're fighting other well-armed folks who'd like to keep their loot. Thank you very much. It's not just a romp through the English countryside. It's serious work with serious consequences. By now, you're probably wondering where the horned helmet myth came from. Blame it on 19th century romanticism and a certain opera composer with a flair for the dramatic. Yes, I'm looking at you, Wagner. Those helmets were never a thing in Viking times. Sure, Vikings wore helmets, but they were practical, no-nonsense affairs without the fancy headgear. As you go about your day, it's clear that the Viking life is a complex tapestry of agriculture, trade, and occasional warfare. You're not just a one-dimensional marauder. You're a farmer, a trader, a sailor. Each role is crucial to the survival of your community, and your ability to navigate these roles defines your success. So, as you prepare to head out to the fields, remember that you're part of a society that's as multifaceted as it is fierce. The legends might paint you as a horned helmet-wearing warrior, but the reality is much more interesting and much more challenging. Just don't forget to thank the gods for a fair wind and a bountiful harvest. You'll need both. So, as you prepare to head out to the fields, remember that you're part of a society that's as multifaceted as it is fierce. While you might be more accustomed to thinking of Viking life as a series of high-seas adventures, there's a whole lot of governance and law keeping the ship steady, so to speak. Yes, believe it or not, the Vikings had their own version of a justice system, complete with a parliament called the Althing. Picture this, an open-air assembly where disputes are settled, laws are laid down, and alliances are forged. It's like your local town hall meeting, but with more fur cloaks and less paperwork. The Althing wasn't just a place to shout about who owes whom a goat. It was a cornerstone of Viking society, where chieftains and freemen gathered to make decisions. Sure, the myth of the lawless Viking makes for a great Saturday night action flick, but in reality, this was a society with rules. Break them, and you could be fined or even declared an outlaw, essentially cutting you off from the community. Imagine being unfriended by everyone you know, permanently. That's enough to make even the most rebellious raider think twice. The Althing met annually in places like Thingvellir in Iceland, a stunning natural amphitheater where you can still feel the echoes of ancient debates. These gatherings were as much about socializing and trading as they were about governance. Think of it as the Woodstock of the Viking Age, minus the psychedelic rock, but with plenty of mead flowing. Now, let's tackle another myth, the idea that Vikings were all brawn and no brains. Their legal system was surprisingly sophisticated, with laws covering everything from property rights to personal injury. In fact, some laws were so detailed they rival modern legal codes. And if you were wronged, you didn't just sit around moping, you took it to the Althing. Justice was often a public affair, and outcomes could be as dramatic as a Netflix courtroom drama. Instead of lawyers, you had chieftains and law speakers reciting legal precedents from memory because, well, libraries weren't exactly a thing yet. And speaking of memory, let's not forget the women. Viking society had roles for everyone, and women weren't just sitting idly by, weaving tapestries and waiting for their warrior husbands to return. Nope, these ladies were managing farms, running businesses, and even going on raids. Archaeological evidence, like the grave of a high-status female warrior found in Burka, Sweden, tells us that women could wield power both at home and on the battlefield. So much for the damsel in distress trope. Women also had legal rights that were quite progressive for the time. They could own property, initiate divorce, and reclaim dowries. Sure, they didn't have the same level of power as men, but compared to women in other parts of medieval Europe, Viking women were practically CEOs. It's a far cry from the passive roles often depicted in popular culture, where they're usually the ones swooning while the men do all the heavy lifting. And here's another twist. While the Viking Age is often portrayed as a testosterone-fueled era of endless conquest, it was also a time of cultural exchange. As Vikings traveled, they didn't just bring back loot, they brought back ideas. Imagine trading in the bustling markets of Constantinople or exploring the river routes of Russia. The cultural diffusion was like a historical blender, mixing languages, religions, and traditions. The Vikings were polytheistic, sure, but they were open-minded enough to incorporate elements from other cultures into their own. Now, let's dive into those surprising modern parallels. The Althing, for instance, is considered one of the world's oldest parliaments. Iceland's modern parliament traces its roots back to these gatherings. It's a testament to the enduring power of governance by consensus, long before constitutions and democratic frameworks became a thing. The principles of negotiation and community decision-making were alive and well in Viking times, showing that these seafaring warriors were more than just brawn, they were also brains. In a world where the sword often dictated terms, the Vikings' respect for law and order was both pragmatic and revolutionary. It was a way to maintain social cohesion in a society that could easily have descended into chaos. A bit like how modern traffic laws keep our roads from turning into demolition derbies. The Althing was a place to address grievances, sort out land disputes, and make sense of a world that was constantly changing. So, next time someone talks about the Vikings as mindless marauders, you can set the record straight. These were people with a complex societal structure, rich cultural exchanges, and a legal system that kept everyone in line, even if it involved a bit of shouting and the occasional axe-wielding chieftain. As you mull over this newfound knowledge, it's clear that the Viking world was as nuanced and layered as a finely woven saga. Of course, all this doesn't mean you should toss your dreams of epic sea battles and treasure-laden raids overboard. The romance of the Viking Age is part of its charm, but it's essential to appreciate the full scope. The society that balanced the sword with the plough, the trade agreement with the battle cry. So, as you head back to your chores or your next epic raid, remember that you're part of a legacy that's been mythologized, but is, at its core, undeniably human. And maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself seeing the world through the eyes of a people who didn't just conquer it, they helped shape it. So, as you grip the oars of your longship, let's cast off and set sail into the world of Viking exploration. A world where the sea was both a highway and a horizon, beckoning with the promise of new lands and new fortunes. Forget your modern GPS and satellite navigation. The Vikings had their own tricks up their sleeves. These were the original explorers, the OGs of the open ocean, if you will. First off, how did these Norse navigators manage to cross treacherous waters without a Google Maps voice telling them to turn left at the next fjord? Well, they used a combination of sun compasses, stars, and a healthy respect for natural phenomena. Think of it as a celestial GPS, just minus the annoying, recalculating tone. The sun compass, a simple yet ingenious tool, helped them determine direction during their voyages. It's essentially a wooden disc with a central pin that casts a shadow, allowing them to gauge the sun's position. Combine that with a bit of stargazing, and you've got yourself a navigation cocktail that's surprisingly effective. And speaking of voyages, let's talk distances. The Vikings weren't just popping over to the next village for a cup of sugar. No, they were crossing the North Sea to England, the North Atlantic to Greenland, and even reaching the shores of North America, centuries before Columbus ever got lost looking for India. That's right, folks. The legendary Norse explorer Leif Erikson landed on what we now call Newfoundland around the year 1000 AD. The settlement at Elance, Orks Meadows, stands as a testament to their far-reaching exploits. Eat your heart out, Columbus. Now, let's address the elephant in the longhouse. Why were the Vikings so keen to explore and conquer? Was it all about the plunder, the glory, the irresistible allure of a good raid? Well, yes and no. Sure, the promise of riches was a powerful motivator. Silver, furs, and slaves were high on their wish list. But there were also practical reasons at play. Overcrowding and limited arable land back home meant that expanding horizons wasn't just adventurous, it was necessary for survival. And let's not forget the allure of trade. Those longships weren't just for raiding, they were the cargo ships of their day. The Vikings established trade routes that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the Abbasid Caliphate, exchanging goods like walrus ivory, amber, and even falcons. These voyages required more than just courage, they needed funding. Building a longship wasn't a weekend DIY project. As mentioned earlier, we're talking about 15,000 man-hours to carve out one of these seafaring beauties. And it's not like you could finance it with a Viking credit card. Wealthy chieftains would sponsor expeditions, pooling resources from their communities. It was an investment in future prosperity, a gamble on the open sea. But let's not romanticize it too much. Viking exploration was as perilous as it was pioneering. The North Atlantic isn't exactly known for its calm waters and sunny skies. Storms could turn a well-planned voyage into a fight for survival. And even if you made it to new lands, there were local populations who might not greet you with open arms and a welcome basket. The Icelandic sagas, those semi-historical, semi-legendary tales, are filled with accounts of fierce battles and uneasy alliances. They paint a picture of a world that was as much about negotiation as it was about conquest. And here's a fun fact. The Vikings weren't just marauding warriors with a taste for blood. They were also curious about the world, and their explorations led to cultural exchanges that were surprisingly sophisticated. In places like modern-day Russia, they interacted with Slavic tribes, leading to a mingling of cultures that would eventually give rise to the Kievan Rus, the precursor to the Russian state. Talk about leaving a lasting impression. Now, let's debunk another myth while we're at it. The image of the Viking as a lone wolf adventurer setting sail on a whim. In reality, these expeditions were well-organized affairs, often involving entire communities. Families would relocate to new settlements, bringing with them not just weapons, but livestock, tools, and the seeds of a new society. It was less about the solitary hero and more about collective enterprise, a floating village heading for a new horizon. And don't be fooled by the idea of the Vikings as isolated marauders, cut off from the world. They were plugged into the early medieval globalization in a way that would make a modern-day jet-setter jealous. Archaeological finds reveal that they brought back silk from the east, spices from the south, and even Arab coins, indicating they were part of a vast network of trade routes. It was a two-way street. Norse goods found their way as far as Baghdad, carried by traders who could probably haggle in multiple languages. So, as you navigate your way through the stories of Viking exploration, remember that these weren't just tales of swords and shields. They were stories of human curiosity, of the drive to explore and understand the world. The Vikings were more than just warriors. They were sailors, traders, and settlers, leaving an indelible mark on the world they so eagerly traversed. And as you stand on the deck of your longship, contemplating the horizon, you're part of a legacy that's both romantic and real, legendary and lived. The Vikings didn't just conquer lands, they connected them, weaving a tapestry of cultures and communities that would shape the course of history. So, keep rowing, keep exploring, and maybe, just maybe, you'll find yourself following in the wake of these daring Norsemen, seeking out new worlds and new possibilities. And speaking of legacies, let's drop anchor and dig into the Viking cultural footprint, shall we? Now, before you start picturing blood-soaked sagas of heroics and glory, let's set the record straight. The Viking cultural legacy is a bit like that Instagram filter. What you see is not always what you get. First off, those sagas. The grand narratives of gods, heroes, and epic battles that make Game of Thrones look like a tea party. But here's the punchline. These were written down a couple of centuries after the Viking Age had sailed into the sunset. Yep, we're talking about oral traditions finally getting the pen and parchment treatment around the 13th century, mostly by Christian monks with their own agendas. So, while these stories are fascinating, they're not exactly the Viking version of a news report. The sagas were packed with larger-than-life characters and deeds. Think of them as the medieval version of a Marvel movie. Sure, Thor was a hammer-wielding god, but he wasn't exactly smiting frost giants on the daily. These stories were a way for the Norse to preserve their history and values, but they were also meant to entertain. And why not? Everyone loves a good yarn, especially when it involves a dragon or two. And then there are the runestones. These aren't just ancient graffiti. They are the Viking equivalent of a Facebook status update carved in stone. From around the 4th century up to the 12th, these stones served as memorials, territorial markers, and occasionally as advertisements for someone's epic voyage. Picture a Norseman carving. Bjorn was here, sailed to the east, brought back silver and stories, and you're not far off. But unlike the sagas, runestones are contemporary artifacts. They're like the tweets of the Viking world, short, to the point, and often boasting about achievements. Yet they also tell us about the communal and familial bonds that were integral to Viking society. You'll see inscriptions like, "Father raised this stone in memory of his son," which shows these folks were as sentimental as they were fierce. Now, let's peel back the romantic veneer and ask, how did the Vikings really see themselves? Were they the fearsome warriors of legend, or something a bit more nuanced? The truth is, they were a little of both. Sure, they loved a good raid, but they also cherished their farms, families, and laws. You'd have found more folks herding cattle and crafting than swinging swords. Remember, the Viking word for wealth, fe, meant cattle. No cattle, no cash, no party. Economically, the Viking Age was a time of booming trade. The Norse were like the Wall Street brokers of their day, trading fur and amber for silver, silk, and spices. They were savvy in their dealings, and their voyages were as much about bartering as they were about battling. Cultural exchanges were inevitable. As they navigated the rivers of Russia or the markets of Byzantium, they picked up new ideas, technologies, and even culinary tastes. Imagine a Viking sampling Eastern spices and thinking, this could spice up some mead. But let's not sidestep the elephant in the longhouse, the romantic image of the Viking hero. It's as alluring as a siren song, but reality was often harsher. These were dangerous times, and not everyone got to retire rich and legendary. Many of those epic voyages ended in disaster, with ships lost to storms or crews falling in battle. Life expectancy was short, and the afterlife was a serious consideration. The idea of Valhalla, a warrior's paradise, was as much a motivator as any earthly riches. Die in battle and feast with the gods. Now that's a retirement plan. And speaking of gods, let's talk religion. The Vikings were polytheistic, worshipping a pantheon that included Odin, Thor, and Freyja, among others, but they were also practical. As they encountered new cultures, some began to adopt Christianity, especially as a way to ease trade relations with Christian Europe. Baptism could be as much a business move as a spiritual one. By the end of the Viking Age, Christianity was making significant inroads, aided by kings who saw the political advantages of a unified religion. But converting wasn't just a matter of flipping a switch. It was a gradual, complex process. You might find a chieftain who still sacrificed to Thor on the side while attending a Christian mass. Talk about hedging your bets. The transition was messy, involving power struggles and cultural shifts, but it laid the groundwork for the Scandinavian nations of today. In the grand tapestry of history, the Vikings stand out as a people of contradictions. Fierce yet familial, explorers yet settlers, pagans yet pragmatists. Their legacy is a mosaic of culture, conquest, and commerce, leaving an indelible mark on the medieval world. So next time you hear a saga or see a runestone, remember the real story might be as complex as a Norse knot, twisted, intertwined, and surprisingly sturdy. And as we anchor here, let's keep the sails ready for our next venture into Viking lore. There's more to explore, more myths to bust, and more sagas to scrutinize. Their story is far from over, and the horizon beckons with the promise of new discoveries. Stay tuned for the next chapter, where the legend and reality of the Vikings continue to collide in a saga that's still unfolding. As we wrap up our Norse narrative and let the sails flutter back down, it's worth pondering why the Vikings have left such an indelible mark on modern culture. The truth is, the Viking legacy is as tangled and enduring as a ship's rigging, with threads reaching far into our everyday lives, even if we don't always realize it. Start with language. If you've ever taken a window of opportunity, thank the Vikings. Words like window, sky, and egg, along with many others, sailed across the choppy linguistic seas from Old Norse into English. The Vikings left behind more than just pillaged goods. They contributed to the linguistic cocktail that is the English language. It's like a Viking raid on vocabulary, less bloody, but still impactful. And let's not forget the days of the week. Wednesday derives from Odin's day and Thursday from Thor's day. So, next time you're grumbling about hump day, give a nod to the All-Father. But language is just the beginning. The Vikings' legal systems have also left their fingerprints on the modern world. Remember that Althing we talked about. It wasn't just some ancient shouting match. It was a precursor to parliamentary systems. The idea of governance through assembly and consensus became a cornerstone in places like Iceland, where the Althing is still in session today, making it the world's longest-running parliament. Talk about staying power. This wasn't just about settling disputes under the open sky. It was laying the groundwork for modern democracy. The Vikings knew that a society needs rules to keep from descending into chaos, much like how modern traffic lights keep rush hour from becoming Mad Max, Fury Road. And let's take a moment to appreciate Viking navigation skills, which were nothing short of extraordinary. They were the GPS of their time, minus the digital voice droning, recalculating every 5 minutes. Their methods, using sun compasses and stars to chart courses across the unyielding North Atlantic, were impressive feats of human ingenuity. These techniques paved the way for future explorers who expanded the horizons of the known world. Without the Viking spirit of exploration, we might still be thinking the Earth ends at the edge of the map, with "Here be dragons" warning. Now, why does the image of the Viking endure so robustly in pop culture? Let's face it, the Viking aesthetic is irresistible. From the horned helmets, totally fictional, to the dramatic longships, it's a visual feast. They've been romanticized in books, movies, and TV shows like Vikings and The Last Kingdom, which blend historical fact with a hefty serving of creative license. These portrayals keep the Viking legend alive, even as they skew the reality. Sure, the real Viking life was more about farming and lawmaking than endless battles, but where's the box office in that? Modern Viking fandom is a curious beast, from people sporting tattoos of Norse runes to those attending reenactment festivals. With as much fervor as a Renaissance fair, the Viking allure is alive and well. There's even a resurgence in Viking-inspired fitness regimes, because who wouldn't want the strength to row a longship or the stamina to swing a battle axe? Yet, while the romance of the Viking lifestyle captivates, it's essential to anchor these fantasies in historical fact. The real Vikings were skilled traders, shrewd negotiators, and yes, fierce warriors. But they were also farmers, family people, and lawmakers. They valued community and cooperation as much as conquest. In the end, the Viking legacy is a saga of contradictions. Fierce yet familial, mythic yet mundane. It's a testament to human curiosity and the urge to explore, to conquer, and to connect. Their story is a woven tapestry of culture, commerce, and conquest that has left an indelible mark on history. So, as you drift off to sleep, dreaming of longships and legends, remember that the Vikings were more than just marauders. They were a bridge between worlds, a testament to humanity's enduring spirit of adventure and discovery. And who knows, perhaps you'll wake up feeling inspired to embark on your own modern-day exploration, even if it's just navigating the complexities of your daily grind. After all, adventure, like the Viking legacy, is all about the journey. In the grand theatre of Tudor England, where drama and intrigue were as common as ale and bread, the story of Catherine Howard begins not with a trumpeting fanfare, but with the quiet chaos of a cluttered household. The Howards, a noble family with the kind of financial acumen that would make a modern accountant weep, were struggling through the economic turbulence of 16th century England. Enter young Catherine, born around 1523, into this world of faded grandeur and unpaid bills. If there was a family crest, it probably featured a moth-eaten purse. Catherine's upbringing was a masterclass in the survival of the least pampered. She spent her early years in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. This wasn't the genteel upbringing you might expect for someone who would eventually catch the eye of a king. The Dowager Duchess ran a kind of aristocratic boarding house for young women, where supervision was lax and privacy was a novel concept. Picture a Tudor reality show without the cameras, teenage hormones, scant oversight, and the kind of romantic escapades that would make a friar blush. Living in such conditions, Catherine learned early on that charm and adaptability were her best assets. The Howard family, despite their financial woes, were savvy players in the Tudor court. They were the kind of people who, despite not having two groats to rub together, somehow always managed to be in the right place at the right time. A talent for political maneuvering was in Catherine's blood, even if the family coffers were emptier than a church during Lent. Now, let's zoom out for a moment to the grand stage on which Catherine's story unfolds. The 16th century was a time of economic upheaval. Inflation was rampant, thanks in part to the influx of silver from the New World, which was causing prices to soar faster than Henry Roman VIII cholesterol levels. For the average person, this meant that basic goods could cost up to 5 times more than they had a few decades earlier. Not exactly the best time for a noble family living on the edge of respectability. Amidst all this, the Tudor court was a place of absurd contradictions. It was as opulent as it was perilous. Picture this: Henry Roman VIII, a king whose appetites were as large as his girth, presided over a court where a single banquet could feature 1,000 dishes. Yet behind the scenes, whispers and plots circulated like the latest fashion. Being close to the king meant navigating a minefield of political alliances and rivalries, where one wrong step could lead to the tower, and not the kind with a scenic view. Catherine's entree into this world was as much a product of chance as it was family strategy. Her cousin, Anne Boleyn, had already made her mark on history by marrying Henry and then losing her head, quite literally. The Howard family, undeterred by such minor setbacks, saw the potential for another power play. After all, what's a little regicide among relatives? At the tender age of around 17, Catherine found herself in the orbit of King Henry Roman VIII. The king, by this point, was a man in his late 40s and had the waistline to prove it. He was on his 5th marriage, and probably on his 5th belt size, having already left a trail of discarded wives and political casualties in his wake. But Catherine, with her youthful charm and vivacity, was a breath of fresh air, or perhaps a whirlwind, depending on your perspective. The Tudor court was rife with romantic myths and scandals, and Catherine's arrival only added fuel to the fire. She was described by contemporaries as the very jewel of womanhood, testimony more to the court's flair for hyperbole than any objective assessment. The truth was, in a world where alliances were sealed with marriages and broken with beheadings, Catherine's tale was as much about survival as it was about romance. Catherine Howard's rise to the position of queen consort was in many ways an absurd fairy tale written by Machiavelli. Her story is a testament to the bizarre and often brutal reality behind the romanticized image of the Tudor court. It was a place where fortunes could change with the flick of a royal wrist, and where the line between success and disaster was as thin as the king's patience. But for a brief, glittering moment, Catherine was the star of this unpredictable show, an indispensable player in the grand game of Tudor politics. We'll dive deeper into that in the next part of her saga. But for now, let's just say Catherine Howard was about to learn that catching a king's eye was the easy part. Keeping it, however, was another matter altogether. In the grand tapestry of Tudor drama, Catherine Howard's ascent was as swift as a courtier's bow. Her path to becoming Henry Roman VIII's 5th wife was paved with the debris of his previous marriages, each a cautionary tale wrapped in velvet and intrigue. Henry's marital history was less a romantic ballad and more a series of political transactions with a bawdy count. So let's unravel this matrimonial mess, shall we? First up, Catherine of Aragon. She was Henry's first wife and a seasoned player in the Game of Thrones. Married in 1509, Catherine was a Spanish princess whose union with Henry was meant to solidify an Anglo-Spanish alliance. But after 24 years, the marriage crumbled like stale bread when Catherine failed to produce a male heir. Enter Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard's infamous cousin. Anne was the bewitching courtier who had Henry tossing aside his queen faster than you could say papal dispensation. Their marriage in 1533, full of passion and defiance, ended in 1536 with Anne's head on the block. The political motivations here were as thick as the fog over the Thames. Henry needed a son, and Anne's inability to deliver the goods sealed her fate. Next, Jane Seymour, the quiet and demure third wife, was the rebound relationship that actually gave Henry what he craved, a male heir, Edward. Jane's death in 1537, shortly after childbirth, left Henry heartbroken and searching for another political alliance. Enter Anne of Cleves, the German princess whose portrait by Hans Holbein was more flattering than reality. Their marriage in 1540 was annulled quicker than a Tudor could down a goblet of mead, primarily because Anne didn't quite meet Henry's aesthetic expectations. It was a union more about European alliances than romantic entanglements. Then there was Catherine Howard, or Catherine, who entered this stage with youthful zest and perhaps a touch of naivete. By the time she caught Henry's eye, he was in his late 40s, more waistline than waistcoat, and nursing a leg ulcer that probably had its own postcode. Catherine, a sprightly teenager, was a stark contrast to the aging monarch. The age gap was the elephant in the room that everyone politely ignored, like a bad smell at a banquet. Contemporary accounts describe Catherine as vivacious and full of life, qualities that must have seemed like a tonic to the weary king. But let's be real. Their relationship probably looked less like a fairy tale romance and more like a royal midlife crisis. At court, Catherine's ascent was meteoric. She went from being a lady-in-waiting to queen consort faster than a Tudor fashion trend. Her charm was undeniable, and in a world where alliances and influence were as fleeting as summer rain, Catherine was a breath of fresh air in the stale corridors of power. But her rise was viewed with a mix of admiration and jealousy. To many, she was the embodiment of youth and beauty. To others, she was a reminder of how precarious life at court could be, where favor could vanish with the same speed it was granted. For Henry, marrying Catherine was a way to rejuvenate his court, and perhaps more importantly, his image. The political motivations were clear. A young, attractive queen could help cement his legacy and offer the possibility of more heirs. But this time, the political stakes were mingled with a personal desire that bordered on the desperate. Henry wanted to prove to the world, and likely himself, that he still had the vigor of a younger man. Catherine, with her effervescent presence, was the perfect antidote to his midlife malaise. However, the contrast between the couple didn't escape the sharp eyes of the courtiers. The whispers at court were as rampant as the fleas in Henry's tapestries. Some saw Catherine's elevation as a sign of the king's dwindling judgment. Others viewed it as a strategic move by the Howards to reclaim their influence at court. Either way, her marriage to Henry was not just a personal union, but a political chess move. In the Tudor game, alliances were as fragile as a Tudor goblet, and Catherine's role was to maintain the king's favor while sidestepping the pitfalls of court life. Despite the odds, Catherine Howard's rapid rise was a testament to her charm and the shifting tides of Tudor politics. Her story, filled with both romance and ruthlessness, was far from over. As we dig deeper into her brief yet tumultuous reign, we'll see how the very traits that captured Henry's heart would eventually lead her to a fate as grim as a winter's day. But hey, in the world of Henry Roman VIII, love and politics were always a dance on a razor's edge. Stay tuned, because Catherine's story is about to take one of those dramatic turns that keeps history as riveting as any Netflix series. But if you thought Catherine Howard's dazzling ascent to the throne was the end of her story, think again. The real drama was only just beginning, and it involved enough intrigue and scandal to make even the most jaded courtier raise an eyebrow, or three. Once the coronation confetti settled, Catherine found herself ensnared in the glittering yet perilous world of Tudor court life, a place where appearances were everything, and loyalty was as stable as a leaf in the wind. To call the Tudor court extravagant would be like calling the sun a bit warm. The royal household was a beast requiring constant feeding, and it devoured resources faster than Henry could devour a roast boar. Maintaining the royal image was a full-time job, and that image didn't come cheap. Picture this. A single gown for a queen could cost upwards of £200, a small fortune when you consider that the annual income of a skilled craftsman was about £5. Catherine, as queen, had to project an image of opulence and stability. Her wardrobe alone was a testament to this, with furs, silks, and jewels enough to make a peacock look like a minimalist. But don't let the sparkle fool you. Behind the sumptuous facade, the pressures mounted like unpaid debts. Catherine was expected to fulfill her role as queen consort, which meant playing hostess with the mostess, ensuring the court remained a hub of political intrigue and diplomacy. In a game where every glance and gesture was scrutinized, Catherine was thrust into a spotlight that was both dazzling and blinding. She had to smile for the courtiers while keeping an eye on the ever-shifting sands of court loyalties. It was a high-stakes chess game, and Catherine was learning the rules on the fly. Then there were the familial pressures. The Howards, not ones to rest on their regal laurels, were keen on leveraging Catherine's position to cement their influence at court, were like the Tudor version of a modern political dynasty, always angling for power and playing the long game. Uncle Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, was a key player in this power play. He was a man who understood the delicate dance of court politics and knew that Catherine's success was intrinsically tied to the Howard family's fortunes. But with great power comes great paranoia, and the court was rife with rumors and backstabbing that would make a soap opera plot seem tame. Amidst all this, whispers of Catherine's alleged infidelities began to circulate. Court gossip was the social media of the day, fast, unforgiving, and often based on little more than a raised eyebrow or a misplaced smile. The tales of her dalliances, particularly with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the King's Privy Chamber, added a layer of scandal that the Tudor court could never resist. The affair, if it indeed happened, was a dangerous game to play. In a world where reputations could be ruined over a misplaced word, the risk was monumental. But whether out of genuine attraction or the naive thrill of rebellion against her constrictive role, Catherine seemed to have danced perilously close to the fire. The political climate was equally turbulent. Henry's court was a nest of vipers, where power struggles and factionalism thrived like mold in a damp cellar. The king himself was a volatile figure, his moods as unpredictable as English weather. By the time Catherine became queen, Henry's health was declining, and his temper was as short as his patience. The ulcer on his leg, a festering reminder of his mortality, only added to his irritability. In this atmosphere, maintaining royal favor was like holding water in a sieve. Ultimately, Catherine's fate was sealed by a toxic brew of ambition, youthful recklessness, and the political machinations of those around her. The Howards' ambition, her alleged indiscretions, and a court ever eager for scandal created a perfect storm. The rumors reached the king's ears, and what followed was a tragic unraveling. Catherine, once the jewel of the Tudor court, suddenly found herself in free fall. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the precariousness of power, where a misstep could lead to ruin, and a whisper could start an avalanche. As the drama reached its crescendo, Catherine's brief moment in the sun was overshadowed by the dark clouds of retribution. But her story doesn't end here. The fallout from her actions and the court's response set the stage for one of the most dramatic downfalls in Tudor history. So buckle up. Catherine Howard's tale is about to take another sharp turn down a path paved with intrigue and inevitable tragedy. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over, and the next act promises more twists than a Tudor tapestry. With the storm clouds of scandal gathering, Catherine Howard's story was about to take a nosedive worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy, minus the iambic pentameter, but with plenty of courtly intrigue. In a twist of fate that would make even Machiavelli raise an eyebrow, the young queen's dalliance with Thomas Culpeper and her past indiscretions finally caught up with her. Enter Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, whose role in Catherine's downfall was as pivotal as it was calculating. Now, Cranmer wasn't your average cleric. He was a political animal, adept in the art of survival in Henry Roman VIII court, a place where religious reform and royal favor were as inseparable as peas and carrots. His involvement in the investigation into Catherine's past was less about moral outrage and more about playing the game. After all, in a court where the stakes were as high as Henry's cholesterol, keeping one's head required more than just piety. The investigation into Catherine's past began with a whispered confession, because in the Tudor court, a whisper could be more lethal than an executioner's axe. John Lascelles, a courtier with his own agenda, tipped off Cranmer about Catherine's previous indiscretions during her time in the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk's household. In a world where the past was never truly buried and skeletons were practically family heirlooms, this was a bombshell. Cranmer, recognizing the explosive potential of this information, penned a letter to the king. Now, Henry Roman VIII wasn't exactly known for his cool-headedness. His reaction to the news was as predictable as it was theatrical. Imagine a bull seeing red, only this bull had a crown and a notoriously volatile temper. The king's fury was as palpable as the tension in the court, and the investigation shifted into high gear. The stakes were high, and the political maneuvering swift. Catherine, the once-beloved jewel of the Tudor court, was suddenly persona non grata. The Howards, seeing their influence crumble faster than a poorly constructed banquet pie, distanced themselves with the speed of a courtier seeking royal favor. The investigation uncovered a tangled web of youthful indiscretions, including an alleged premarital contract with a certain Francis Dereham, a man whose name was about to become synonymous with scandal. For Catherine, walls were closing in. The allegations of her past indiscretions, the romantic entanglements that were once mere whispers, became a cacophony of damning evidence. In the Tudor court, where morality was often more about convenience than conviction, these revelations were enough to seal her fate. The legal and social mechanisms that allowed for Catherine's swift downfall were as brutal as they were efficient. Treason, in the eyes of Tudor law, wasn't just about plotting against the king. It was about any act that could bring dishonor to the crown. And in this case, dishonor was spelled out in scandalous detail. Her alleged infidelity was construed as a direct threat to the king's honor and the legitimacy of the Tudor line. The stakes were nothing short of dynastic security. Catherine was stripped of her title faster than you could say royal annulment and placed under house arrest at Sion Abbey. The once glittering queen found herself in a stark reality, her world collapsing around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The swiftness of her downfall was a testament to the Tudor court's ability to pivot from adoration to condemnation with the agility of an Olympic gymnast. As the investigation continued, the court was a spectacle of political theater. Witnesses were questioned, confessions extracted, and alliances tested. Cranmer, ever the pragmatist, played his part with the precision of a chess master moving pieces across a board. The Howards, once the architects of Catherine's rise, were now scrambling to salvage what remained of their influence. It was a game of survival, and the stakes were higher than ever. In November 1541, the Privy Council convened to discuss the fate of the Queen. The decision was as swift as it was brutal. Catherine was to be executed for treason, an outcome as predictable as it was tragic. The Queen, whose charm had once captivated the king, was now nothing more than a pawn in a deadly game of political chess. As the trial approached, the question of justice, or the lack thereof, hung over the proceedings like a dark cloud. In a court where the king's word was law, and justice was often more about expedience than fairness, Catherine's trial was less a quest for truth and more a foregone conclusion. The Queen was denied a formal trial. Her guilt was decided by act of attainder, a legal mechanism that bypassed the need for a jury. It was a chilling reminder that in Tudor England, the scales of justice were often tipped by power and politics rather than truth and fairness. The speed of Catherine's downfall was matched only by the swiftness of her execution. On February 30, 1542, she faced the executioner's block at the Tower of London, her brief reign coming to a grim and abrupt end. Her final moments were a stark contrast to the glittering promise of her rise, an end as inevitable as the tides. In the grand tapestry of Tudor history, Catherine Howard's story is a cautionary tale of ambition, youth, and the perilous dance of power. Her downfall was as dramatic as her ascent, a testament to the volatile nature of a court where fortunes could change as swiftly as the king's moods. Yet, despite the tragedy, her story is far from over. The impact of her rise and fall rippled through the court, affecting not just her own fate, but the future of those who dared to play the game. Stay tuned, because the reverberations of Catherine's tragic end would echo far beyond her own lifetime, reshaping the very landscape of Tudor politics. As the axe fell, and Catherine Howard's brief life ended on that chilly February day in 1542, the tremors of her downfall rippled through the Tudor world like ripples in a pond, or perhaps more like shark-waves through a kingdom already teetering on the edge of chaos. Henry Roman VIII, the man who had once been captivated by her youthful charm, now found himself nursing yet another broken heart, and a kingdom in the throes of political and social upheaval. Her execution, while seemingly a personal tragedy, was a public spectacle that underscored the lethal dance of power, gender, and politics in Tudor England. Let's talk about Henry Roman VIII first, the king whose love life was more crowded than a Tudor banquet table. By the time of Catherine's execution, Henry was more seasoned in regicide than romance, having already sent 2 wives to their deaths. But Catherine's demise was different. It wasn't just another chapter in his infamous marital chronicle. It was a sobering reminder of the volatile nature of court politics and a reflection of his increasingly erratic rule. The king's health was declining faster than his waistline could expand, and the ulcer on his leg had become a metaphor for his reign, a festering wound that refused to heal. Catherine's execution left an indelible mark on Henry's psyche and his subsequent marriages. His sixth and final marriage to Catherine Parr was a more subdued affair, one might even say pragmatic. Parr, a widow with a sensible head on her shoulders, was less about passion and more about companionship and care. She was almost like Henry's personal nurse and political partner rolled into one, which was a relief for those who feared another romantic fiasco. In marrying Parr, Henry sought stability over spectacle, a move that signaled a shift in his approach to marriage after the tumultuous Catherine Howard debacle. In the broader context of the Tudor court, Catherine's execution served as a cautionary tale for those who followed. It was a stark reminder that the court was a place where power was as transient as the English summer, and favour could vanish like a mirage. For future queens, Catherine's story was a chilling lesson in the perils of courtly life. It highlighted the double standards and gender politics that governed the lives of women in the Tudor era. Queens were expected to be paragons of virtue, yet they were also political pawns in a game where the rules were written and rewritten by men. The impact of Catherine's death was felt far beyond the court. It resonated through the corridors of power and into the hearts of England's future queens. It was a testament to the precarious balance of power and the dangerous allure of the throne. For the women who came after her, Catherine's fate was a somber reminder that in the Tudor world, a queen's crown was as much a burden as it was a symbol of power. The legacy of her downfall was felt by the likes of Elizabeth I, who would later navigate the treacherous waters of courtly politics with the skill of a seasoned sailor, well aware of the perils that had ensnared her cousin. Now, let's debunk a few myths while acknowledging the romantic narratives that have persisted through history. Catherine Howard is often painted as a naive, romantic figure, a young girl caught in the web of a ruthless court. While there's a kernel of truth to this, it's important to remember that she was also a product of her time and upbringing. Raised in an environment where political maneuvering was as common as mealtime prayers, Catherine was no stranger to the complexities of court life. Her story is less a tale of innocence lost, and more a reflection of the brutal realities faced by women in positions of power. The romantic narrative of Catherine as a tragic heroine, while appealing, oversimplifies her story. Yes, she was young and perhaps naive, but she was also a player in a game that was rigged from the start. The allure of romance and the pursuit of power were intertwined in a way that made it impossible to separate one from the other. Her legacy is a reminder that in the Tudor court, love and ambition were two sides of the same tarnished coin. In the end, Catherine Howard's life and death reveal much about the nature of power, gender, and politics in Tudor England. Her story is a microcosm of a world where women were often caught between their own desires and the expectations placed upon them by a patriarchal society. Catherine's rise and fall illustrate the perilous dance between personal ambition and political necessity, a dance that was as lethal as it was alluring. As we reflect on Catherine's legacy, it's important to remember that while her life was cut tragically short, her story continues to resonate. It offers a window into a world where the line between success and disaster was as thin as a courtesan's veil, and where the stakes were nothing less than life and death. Her tale is a cautionary reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the precarious nature of power, a lesson that, while rooted in the past, is as relevant today as it was in the 16th century. So there you have it, the story of Catherine Howard, a woman who, for a brief moment, held the heart of a king and the attention of a court. Her life was a whirlwind of romance, intrigue, and tragedy, a tale as compelling as any epic drama. And while her story may have ended at the executioner's block, the lessons it imparts continue to echo through history, reminding us of the complex interplay between power and politics, love and ambition. In the grand tapestry of Tudor history, Catherine Howard's life is a vivid, if tragic, thread, a testament to the enduring allure and peril of the Tudor court.